Thank you.
Thank you.
Call to order. Welcome to the Planning Board special meeting here in Town Council Chambers, June 16th, 2022 at 9 a.m. Seeing how we have a quorum, Jerry Burns is not in today at the meeting. He had a family situation. He's out of town traveling, but we again have a quorum. We could start by the Pledge of Allegiance, please. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have an agenda before us that town staff prepared. I'd like to start off by making an amendment to the agenda, which we can then vote on. I'd like to add in between the amending or approval of the draft agenda and old business, I'd like to add public comments on agenda items only towards the beginning of the meeting, which would be 3 minutes. I'd like to entertain a motion, or can we have some discussion on that?
How's that? I'll
Any?
make the motion to add that agenda item permanently to the
Good.
special meeting agenda.
Good wording. Thank you, Ron.
Okay.
I seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, the next item would be public comments. And seeing we do have a guest in the audience, sir, do you have a comment you'd like to make publicly on our agenda?
I had on the top of your agenda, so I don't know what I want to talk about is.
Okay, sir, if you're going to speak,
go
you have
ahead,
to come to the microphone.
Just go ahead, make your comment.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Come to the microphone and please give us your name and address, if you would, sir.
My name is Barry Engel. I live on Live Oak Drive, and I have a business in Ocean Isle, Sunset Beach.
Sure.
And this week, Chad came by and stated that our feather flags, I guess they're called, were against.
Sir, if I could interrupt you, I apologize for interrupting, but the comment would be at the beginning of the meeting on agenda items only. There would be a comment period at the end of the meeting for anything that you want to talk about that has to do with the town. Today we're talking about, or we're starting off with UDO revisions to our Article 10, which is tree preservation. So I'm going to have to limit your conversation to agenda items only.
Not a problem. I'll wait till the end.
All right, thank you. Thank you for showing interest in attending our meeting. All right, coming to old business. The topic of business today is the UDO audit continuation. And for the benefit of those on YouTube watching us, this is our 6th meeting. We're in our series to revise the present Unified Development Ordinances for the town of Sunset Beach. And we've made pretty good progress. We're up through Articles 1 through 9. We've completed our first pass at it. And we're going to start this morning with Article 10, which is landscape and buffering requirements. Chad, do you have any staff comments as we get into, which is going to be a pretty complex Article 10?
My only staff comment would be that I've talked to Wes is, again, making this more user-friendly and not just for businesses and residential and alike, but also staff. Okay. I've talked to Wes and I've talked, there are ways that where you can bring a table in, you know, with 4 to 6 buffers and make it very easily. If you're along this corridor, or if you're along a street frontage, or if you're along a side street, a residential abutting a non-residential, residential abutting a residential, you know, these could be your new standards and not make it kind of as convoluted as it is.
Like a subdivision abutting an existing residential development.
I mean, you'll have 4 to 6 buffering standards. If it falls into this category, this is what your buffering standards are, and just making it easier. Yes, Sybil?
Oh, no, go ahead.
Oh, okay. And that would be my only wish for this, because it can get convoluted, it can be confusing.
A couple things along that exact line. Well, go ahead, Sybil.
Okay.
Please.
I wanted you to finish. I'm sorry. I found in going through this, it's so confusing. You jump from residential to business. You jump from street, and Eh, And like even the first page here on 1001, I mean, the whole thing is redundant. You say the same thing over and over, and we've got to get this out of it. We've got to get the. I mean, why can't we have a section for landscape and buffering for residential and a section for landscape and buffering for business? Why
Yeah.
does it have to be all intertwined and then it just gets?
It
If I were building, well, I wouldn't. I'd quit on this one.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be confusing. It can be straightforward and easy to
Yeah,
see. You can
should
put it
be.
in a chart. I've seen it done. There are going to have to be additional standards where you have to look at some things, but this is another one of those big hit items on staff is to let's make this more efficient and easy to read and interpret. And I can now turn it over to Wes.
I'm glad that you're bringing that up because I'm sure the board is unanimous on what Sybil's saying. It needs to be less confusing. And there's certain things that were you finished
I
with that
was,
thought?
yes, thank you.
There's certain things that I think are critical. We make it confusing when we talk about what are appropriate trees to replant in replacement of heritage trees. And some of those trees that we show on our list aren't even available, or they're not really indigenous to this area. Those, I think we need, and hopefully Wes has someone at COG that can really help us with that. We need to provide a list that is understandable by developers and by residents. The thing that I am really vehement about is that we need to protect our heritage trees. Now, that being said, we obviously cannot keep every heritage tree that exists as we develop, as we expand, but there needs to be reasonable reasons for a developer or a homeowner or a commercial property owner taking down a heritage tree of a certain size. And and our UDO does not stress that. I believe our UDO it really opens up for clear cutting. It opens up for not having developers and residents say why a heritage tree needs to come down and provide a reason the town staff can then evaluate on a tree by tree basis.
Can we, for the clarification of the audience, both here and for me, frankly, do we have a definition or a list of heritage trees?
It's defined in the ordinance.
Yes, we do. It's an appendix.
It's an appendix too.
But I believe, I can read it, but I believe it's 8 inches DBH of a certain species, basically hardwoods.
But it's
So
not,
we're talking oaks.
it's not very consistent though either.
But may I point out that
Please.
we're supposed to be going over this. When we get to that, we'll do all of this discussion. Let's start here in 1001.
Well, you're exactly
Which is
right,
not-
Sid. I just wanted to give my overview that I think we need to be protecting trees as an overview for this entire section.
Yeah.
But you're correct.
I guess I would have a question first of all. Are we intending in this review to overhaul this section completely? Or are we intending to keep it to what it is with new language? Because we had I don't know, it was before you came on
Yeah,
board?
I was on.
Or when Tom, no, well, Tom must have been here because that's
Tom
when
was chair.
I had my original dispute with the board. We began a process of overhauling the complete tree preservation side of our UDO.
Yeah.
And then due to legal disputes, it got, let's just say tabled,
Mixed.
okay? Which I wasn't happy with, I'll say. But anyway, so we talked about it quite a bit. I think that at the time, and there are new members now, the feeling was that our current structure was inadequate for preserving trees in the community for various reasons, mostly development. And that's why we got started on the whole, let's redo the whole thing. We looked at the tree ordinance in Hilton Head Island. I actually went to Hilton Head Island on a vacation to see what the effect of, we shared their ordinance. It's a very elaborate ordinance. But I can clearly see it work.
Yes.
With just drive, but anyway, we may not want to go that far. But anyway, so that, I guess my first question is our intent on this? Because if we change this significantly, you are having an impact on other areas, sort of indirectly. If you force people to preserve or replace trees, you're essentially sort of, in the implication of time, changing some of the zoning, so to speak, and uses. So I guess I want to know, are we going to, is that part of the elephant we're biting now, is doing this or not, or we're just our existing structure and clean it up a bit, and because
We want to try. Let me just, since we're sort of just talking in general here, let me say that if we go sit in Oak Island today with the planning board, if we go sit in the city of Wilmington with the planning board, if we go sit in the town of Topsail Beach with the planning board, if we go sit in Pender County planning board, the members of the planning board will say exactly what you said. All of them will say what we're doing for tree preservation is frankly inadequate. And that is because the tools within which we have to regulate trees, in light of the other things that have to occur on the site, are very difficult. So you have to put.
Now, the other thing,
Can I finish,
I'd
please?
just like to know what the other quote unquote other things are.
I will finish.
Okay.
And so you've got stormwater you got to put on the site. You got roads you got to put on the site. You got houses you got to put on the site. Oftentimes, state stormwater necessitates a certain amount of regrading of the site. If you regrade the site, it's very difficult to preserve certain trees. Now, what a lot of local governments do in the region is what's more of a mitigation-based tree ordinance. That means that, hey, we come in and we can essentially modify the site. We may keep very limited trees, but then we'll put it back on. The alternative is preservation, but you can only do preservation to the extent that you're not providing what is, quote, a regulatory taking of land, and find yourself in court with a developer that says, you don't let me cut any trees down. How am I supposed to be able to develop my property? You cannot do that. So we have to strike the appropriate balance. And there is not a clear way, there's no silver bullet for doing this. What I'll say is that I think that, and I've worked on these with a number of local governments, is trying to figure out, is there a certain tree species, is there a certain size that we really want to preserve on site? Is this a 20-inch tree? Is it a 25-inch tree? Is it a live oak? Let's figure out how to preserve that, and let's figure out how on the periphery and some other areas to preserve some other trees. But just know that, look, you cannot do development without clearing trees. It is impossible. You can make that stance as a town, we're not going to allow development, and you'll get sued into oblivion. So, I think that everybody sees the trees getting cut down. I don't like seeing trees get cut down, but it is the reality. You all live in homes that necessitated your trees being cut down to get there. So,
Let Richard
Yeah.
finish his point.
See, I
Are
have
you
I-
are you satisfied with your
Yeah.
period there? Okay.
Yeah, and I have somewhat of a unique perspective on this, having lived in a family-owned property in Sea Trail since '91. The vast majority of Sea Trail got developed. Trees were preserved. It's one of the things that makes it unique. Now, I'm sure the stormwater regulations, some of the other things may not have been in place at that time that make it more difficult. For me, what I hear when I walk around the community is it's difficult to like narrow this down to a tree. But what they don't want is what happened at Sunset Ridge. Okay, you clear cut what happened at the sanctuary.
You've answered your own question, though, because you're saying when it was developed as single-family homes one at a time, not a 20-unit
That's not
subdivision.
true. No, there are multifamily embedded in the. If you drive down by Maples or some of the early multifamily developments, there are large trees, very very well shaded areas that those buildings were built in and around. So, I mean, I'd be the first to say, yes, I understand the dilemma for the developer, but, you know, I mean, the development that's gone on in Sea Trail up to now, particularly along Birdwatch, I mean, the population in Sea Trail is up in arms about that. You know, how do we create an ordinance?
All right, can we kind of stick with the topic? I'm not trying to be rude, but
Yeah,
we're
well, I
all
think I'm
going on
getting
and on. We're
to the
repeating it.
topic. I mean, I'm trying to. How do we figure out how we can avoid what's happening now? Because I think what's happening now is well below what we would wish for, without ruining or overburdening the developer that wants to come in and build 30 houses.
In my mind, it goes back to what I mentioned before, figuring out, you know, you have a whole host of heritage trees that are only 8-inch DBH. That's not a very big tree.
Right.
So what if we modify it to say, hey, look, our true goal is actually the very substantial trees.
Yes.
We want to figure out how best to preserve those trees. If we need to take out 8-inch, you know,
Or replace them or do
replace
something.
them, not that big of a deal. But you know, the city of Wilmington has gone and taken a stance that there's a certain tree size that you are not allowed to take out. I think that's a little extreme. I think that we could figure out how that, you know, maybe there's a certain portion of them that you're allowed to take out, but you actually really truly need to plan to incorporate some of those into your development. And if you want to take out all of them or whatever it is, then you need to go before the Board of Adjustment and request a variance.
Well, but town staff can also deal with that by people having a reason for taking a tree down. And if the reason is legitimate, then I think town staff is equipped to say, hold it, your driveway doesn't have to be there. It could be moved over 3 feet and still be functional, and you don't have to take down that 12-inch live oak tree.
It's easier said than done.
Well, but at least it's a process for making the applicant come up with a reason, and
Sure.
not just say
Or come up
stormwater
with a
and not
solution.
identify anything.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Well, you can call this general discussion
Yeah,
if
it's
you
just
want.
general discussion.
And then we'll deal with each thing individual, just like you're saying.
But this is one of those tangents we get off on.
All right. Well, let's take that as a lead.
I
And
just can make 2 additional comments and I'm done.
all right, and then we're going to go to 10:01 as
Okay,
saying.
2 comments I made, which I finished where I was. I said, I don't remember it was even where Chad was here, a proposal
Todd
on
was
a new
here.
framework on tree preservation that was a point survey and point-based system,
Mhm.
which gave you more points, I think 50% more points for saving a tree.
Mhm.
And then, and it was done by size and whatever. And then, of course, it didn't tell you couldn't take a tree out or not take a tree out. It gave more value to saving a tree, and it gave you, and you had to do something your point wise to replace trees.
Sure.
So I sent that framework out. I don't know, I have no idea where it is.
Here's the reference that he's talking about.
Yeah,
If you go to our meeting minutes of March 19th, it has a Labruno option.
Mhm.
It's in our minutes. It's a public document.
Okay, so
March 19th,
that
2020.
so whether we can regurgitate or take another look at
Sure.
the point of that framework was, one, it was a framework. The numbers can be changed
Yep.
in there if they're not appropriate. And the second comment I made, and we had a discussion at the time, was I think we need to spend some money and get an arborist to tell us on what trees Because when we started looking at the list, and I believe we had a lady in here that told us, that gave us a little public comment on some trees are worth more to save because of wildlife. They may not be a size thing on it. So the discussion back there was also about consulting an arborist to go over our appendix of what are the, what we call heritage trees or trees to be saved by species and size.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
All right, now, as Sybil
Reminded.
appropriately reminded us to get on track. 10.01, purpose and application. Does anybody have any specific comments for 10.01?
I do.
Please.
It's very redundant. The same words are used over and over in the beginning and in D and E. A lot of these things could be put together. They're being repetitive. It should be, in my opinion, broken down to preserve and enhance natural resources, benefits from pollution, erosion, minimize floods, energy conservation. I felt like that was vague, and property value. I just think, I mean, if you read through these, you can see that the same words are used over and over, saying basically the same thing. That's my opinion.
All right, thank you. Good point, too. Any other comments on 10.01 or beyond what Wes has already given us on our handout here? He has 2 or 3 points that he's talking about. I agreed with his points.
Yeah, just on your third point, when you say substantially improved, are we talking that the greater than 50% improvement
I
rule that we
believe-
kind of use for other things?
That's the definition, and Sybil, I do apologize that we sort of kind of go off on a tangent, but it helps me philosophically understand the position of the board for me to help make changes to draft changes in here, because
I understand that.
but if I may, I mean, you're right. This thing is confusing, and so yes, we need to go through section by section, but it is almost all going to have to be reorganized, redone, etc. I think in terms, if we keep the same layout here, it's just going to be another confusing
Well,
mess.
I mean, we are constantly reminded how we're behind, and we're constantly reminded
Yeah.
about how we need to keep moving. And then we are going to be discussing trees because they're here,
Right.
but
Well,
not,
in the
when we
interest of
get to it.
time, I mean, if I had an understanding of what it is that you guys were after, we can obviously go through section 10 with in the state that it's in, but I can also then provide you draft material in lieu of us belaboring over these sections that are confusing. But substantial improvement would be yes, it would be residential. It's the 50%, and so that's the other thing that we need to talk about. And I guess we can get to it here, but there's a very big difference in terms of subdivision development, non-residential commercial development, and then your residential development that's on a existing platted lot, because now you've also got stormwater controls you got to put in, and that's so there's a lot of moving parts to this.
And also philosophically, I think we're very light on, and I'm an existing resident. I have 7 oak trees in my, they're not live oaks, but oak trees, huge, 24-inch at least caliber. And it would be convenient for me I could take it down, and because I don't want to rake leaves.
Yeah.
That shouldn't be.
Sure.
It's those kind of things, and I think we're very light on me as a resident taking care of my residential property. We have some meat against the commercial development, making them prove their case, but not individual residents. And I think that's appropriate for staff. One thing that we under C in 10.01, there's a item for C2, talks about time extensions, the 180 days coming through the planning board. I just look at that as being onerous. I don't see why that couldn't come through staff.
Yep.
Time, I don't think planning board needs to deal with time extensions.
I have another question. It said on, I'm back on A1, E.
Yep.
Minimize any adverse impacts of new development or existing uses through provision of screening, buffering, landscaping, and other commonly established and accepted techniques. Isn't that awfully vague and
Sure.
confusing?
Yes, and but this purpose section isn't necessarily regulatory in the standpoint. It's just providing the foundation for why the true regulations are in place. But that can be stricken.
But you've got to go through all of this to get to that. So if you're already confused before you go further,
Sure. This would come into play. The purpose statement would come into place if a provision of this were challenged legally. But it sort of attempts to set the foundation. But we can strike that language, I think.
In somewhat in response to Pete's point about the residential standards, I know many of the HOAs have fairly rigid standards that if I want to cut down a tree, I have to go before an architectural review board and get permission. I'm not sure I want to rely on the HOAs to preserve, is that a method that the town could adopt? Would it be redundant that trees of a certain size, and I'd be okay with that being a fairly substantial size tree, and if that's on your residential lot and you want to take it down, you need to either come before staff, some institution within the town that can say yes, no. Is that something that is done in other towns, or
Yes,
how would that be handled?
it spans the gamut. Some have rules that exempt residential properties of a certain size. Others, they say that if the tree is located within a certain distance of your an accessory structure, excuse me, or
Like 10 feet.
or your principal, then you can remove it. And then others will say that if it's not, then you need a letter from an arborist, et cetera, because for example, those oaks that Pete has, I don't know what species, if they're laurel, sand oak, or whatever, they typically have a 50 year or so time span, and they get rotted out from the interior. They start dropping limbs, and they can be quite frankly dangerous in the event of storms. But versus like a live oak, whereas those things, if you take good care of them, they'll last forever.
Right.
But that's something the town can do. I mean, it's just dependent upon the position that you want to take. I mean, and do know that, look, the legislature is still very serious about preempting our ability to regulate trees. So, you guys can be as strict as you want.
But it can be appealed.
Yeah, well, or the legislature may say, "Hey, look at these folks in Sunset Beach. They are out of their mind. We should preempt all local government authority from regulating trees because they have taken it a step too far." This is just a reality that we're living in. So we just got to figure out how to strike the appropriate balance. If you have a tree on your property that, say, for some reason you want to take it down, what is the realistic rules behind it? Maybe it's better to have the HOA do it. I don't know. The town can do it. Boiling Spring Lakes, they do they require that you keep trees within a certain that are outside a certain distance of your home. We've got the town of Topsail Beach. You cannot remove anything in the setback area that's over 3 inches. That's the same with town of Surf City. And then what that does is it sort of creates a buffer around your lot. And I think it has been successful for them, and folks do abide by it.
I'd like to see something like that in the
You mean
workup.
outside the setback area?
So it not in the building envelope. So if it's a 10-foot setback, 10 foot from the property line,
Right, okay.
you're keeping everything above a certain size.
Mhm.
Now they have, it's a little bit different there. They refer to it as their maritime forest overlay, and it's only on half the island. But um, there, like I said, there's a host of directions you guys can go. If I have a better sense of what it is that you want, we can start crafting something to get on paper and then go from there.
Well, my emphasis has been on development and new construction.
Okay. Not on
I know
existing.
Pete has more emphasis on existing because, in my mind, if you count the number of trees that are downed in the town, it's got to be well over 90% are down due to construction, not by existing homeowners removing trees. One, it costs a bundle of money to get somebody out there about $800 to $1,000. So people don't generally do it on a whim, in my mind. I don't, at least. And I think you're always going to be fighting the safety. One, it says it's a diseased tree or an unhealthy tree, you can remove it. All that, because, and you got the safety, the wind issue.
Yep.
If somebody wants to remove what they perceive as a not healthy tree, maybe some sort of hickory or something, and the town says, no, we think it's fine, and next storm it falls on somebody's house. If I was the owner and I had the money to hire a lawyer, I know what I would do.
Right.
You just told me not to remove that tree.
Yeah.
And now it's laying on the top of my bedroom.
Right.
What's your liability, town? So anyway, I agree, maybe we have to look at things we could do, but we've got to be careful we're not dipping the town into hot water that may not, in my mind, most of the trees are down because of new construction. I don't know if Chad, you can address.
So
I don't know. I mean, I look around, I see only occasionally people cutting down trees, but when you see new construction, like sanctuaries and other places, it's like 1,000 trees are gone. That the number of trees down in construction far, far outnumber what post-construction happens.
What do you see, Chad?
I mean, the biggest thing, again, my wish for this is to make it enforceable. Do not put anything in here that is too rigorous for me to enforce, because oftentimes towns have problems not just with trees. You can throw out short-term rentals and stuff like that that make it to the extent where it is unenforceable. It's a good rule, but it's unenforceable.
Yeah, but by having a rule that says the UDO administrator has that right of refusal, if you will,
Discretion,
then at
yes.
least it provides an initial step for somebody, rather than being able to call up Joe Blow, arborist, and say, I want that tree down.
Yes.
I need to come in and get permission from you for certain size trees.
And they do.
Wes is saying.
That we have a clearing and grading permit. We have a tree removal permit that people use. One of the things, I think we're looking at 4 different things here. We're looking at new construction or residential subdivision tree unities, problems that, again, a week ago today, Wes and I sat in a room with a lot of other planners from this community. We're all facing the same problem that I often talk about this problem with, and there's no silver bullet for this one item. The second one is your non-residential construction and making sure our buffering standards are good, to making sure that, especially on your non-residential to residential buffering, is satisfied and the residential side is protected. The third is make it enforceable. Make it as easy to enforceable and easy to interpret it, not just for me who's in it every day, but also the citizen who I have to explain what a UDO is type situation. And then 4, there needs to be a definition of a hazardous tree that needs to be added in here, and that covers your diseased trees, your dead trees.
So Rod brought up a good point about having somebody that's a licensed arborist make that call.
And pulling a permit for it, because we do have storms around here. We are, embedded into that risk vulnerability side of hurricanes, wind storms, tornadoes, stuff like that, to where trees can be projectile objects and fall on people's residence. So those are the 4 things if to keep in mind. And if give Wes a couple tidbits, and then ultimately for all of Article 10, really, trust staff to bring you back something that might not satisfy everything with the board, but it also probably will satisfy a lot of it, and it will keep us legal. So that would be.
And I think what Wes said before about, we had a sort of a show up and throw up here a minute ago about an overview. But I think that does give Wes and you the overview that I think you need to have in the back of your mind as you go through this.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would just add, I mean, this issue, and I get it about enforcement, but I think this is an important enough issue in terms of the passion that exists in the town that if we need to add additional resources for enforcement, then let's add them. What we want, because the other issue too, and this is from the sanctuary, is they cut down these trees and then they burn them. I mean, what do we have in our portfolio to prevent that from happening again?
Well, I mean, the fact that they've got to pull and I know this for a fact because I've dealt with this before in other jurisdictions, is that you have to pull a air quality permit from, what's the agency?
DEQ, right?
DEQ.
Yeah, you have to pull an air quality permit from DEQ for those things that happen. So they become legal. It's a state permit. It's not a local permit, but it becomes a state permit.
So the town has no recourse in terms of.
Nope.
Now, can they petition at this time of the air quality?
So they have to pull an air quality permit for that to happen.
But the town can be at that hearing or.
This is where you're straying into.
I'm going to suggest we get back on track.
Yeah.
Really?
And because we can ad lib this forever.
Okay.
Well, I think we're on 10 point, and now
10.02.
Yeah.
what Sybil had said before.
Yeah,
We're now on
10.02.
10.2.
Yeah.
Does anybody have any specific comments about what we have here in 10.2 or what we don't have in 10.2?
I just want to make sure that in terms of what we've discussed, because we have gone off on a couple of tangents, in terms of what's going to happen next, what are we going to get that moves us closer to a solution to this problem? I mean, how are we going to?
That's why we've hired Wes to take our comments and reshape them and give us the second phase of this process, then we get another bite at the apple.
Is that, Wes, is that?
That's correct. I mean,
Okay.
you'll get your first draft material today that will be, a compilation of what we've discussed on those previous articles.
Well, my concern is, I mean, you're very vocal and it's perfectly appropriate to say, yes, I want a sense of what the board wants.
Yep.
Do you have that sense?
As we go further through the article, I think that will continue to, we'll continue to get there.
Okay.
Anybody have any comments regarding 10.02? Can we move on to 10.03, maintenance, which Wes had indicated that it's a short article with not much in it, but he said that it could stand as
Before you
issue.
leave,
Mhm.
whatever, I lost where I am. I'm on page 10.6, and it's article at the top of the page. It's jumping back and forth between residential and business. There again, I'm pointing out that that's super confusing. And down at the bottom at B4, it's like yes or no. It isn't explanatory. It doesn't. You don't know whether it's right or not.
Sorry, on 10.4?
What section are you in, Sybil?
She's in 10.2,
10.2.
Yeah.
and she's in
B4.
Bravo.
Well, start out in the one before, which was keeping these up. Well, gosh, D. I guess it's D. But then we're over on the next page, and for some reason it's 3, 4, and 5. And I said that the language is jumping back and forth between residential and business, and
Yeah.
therefore it's more confusing.
I see what Sybil's talking about. You go from D 1 through 10, and then you jump to the next page and you go 3 through 5.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then down at 4, B4.
Under general landscaping requirements.
It's just, you don't get a yes or no. I think it allows too many things to be considered for ground cover. And is mandatory on all portions of exposed ground or earth not occupied by other approved material.
Now, this is something that's changed in the last several years regarding ground cover. I mean, there was a...
Yeah, we had a big meeting about it. The guy
Yeah.
came and spoke, and
Yeah.
we heard all that, and then we approved the recycled tire mulch,
Yep.
which I still question.
Well, it's not approved on the island.
Yes.
Yeah, well, but, you know,
Um,
we're not far from the island.
yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's, I guess, it seems clear to me that that ground cover is required. But
Yeah, and moving on, in 6, on the next page, which would be, I guess, I don't think B, I don't know, it's
It
6.
is, it's B6. It's 10.02 Bravo 6. Planting and or privacy
Privacy
fencing.
fencing should result in a screening of utility areas from adjacent yards. To me, that's like the boxes, the electric boxes they put out between lots. Well, if it's on your side, it's on their side too. I didn't understand that.
well, that's out of place, just the same as the section C on parking lot screening, because we addressed that.
Yes.
That somehow got tossed in there. I
And
don't
it
know
shouldn't be,
without,
right.
and it shouldn't be.
Right. So as you
So-
talked about earlier, Chad, that clearly we need like a residential.
Yep.
And I guess we need a non-residential. And
And
I
a
guess that we need the third one that we've been arguing about recently, non-residential uses in a residential community.
Mhm.
Or can the first two be sufficient?
Well, you need non-residential abutting a residential, because
Yeah,
that's.
Well, then that's
what
the
bu-
third one.
That's what the buffer is for.
Right.
It's-
Right.
So, but we need, like you said, structurally, we need to divide this up into the,
Yeah,
Did you-
typically
did
the
you-
way we handle it, or that I think of it, is you have what are termed a street yard area. This is, and this is mainly for commercial type development or multifamily that's not doing a subdivision. You have a street yard area that you plant or you retain tree material. And then you have a buffer along your property lines that would be your rear and your side. And this is, again, not subdivision, but a multifamily, or a commercial. And then a component
Where's it?
also is, I'm just talking about the framework in which I believe is
Okay.
And you're
Yeah,
going to adopt
I'm
this
with you now.
framework. You're just giving us a preview.
correct.
Okay.
And then also you have tree preservation mitigation that occurs on that lot. Same as you also figure out tree preservation and mitigation for your subdivision. And then you have your standalone existing platted lots, and you figure out, are we planting species on there? Are we requiring certain planted material on someone's building a custom home on a lot, or are we requiring preservation? Or both. And so that's sort of the way in which I think about it.
Okay.
I think you'd get an agreement from the board.
Okay.
Anybody?
Yeah, I think that sounds pretty good. I mean, in existing residential, for instance, people will install like splits on their garages. And that unit is going to hang outside of the garage, and in many situations is going to be exposed. Now, do we have something that covers that, or we just kind of let that slide?
Excuse me, Richard. They want to do what on their garage?
HVAC system.
He's talking about a split unit for
Split
air
unit.
conditioning and heating.
Yeah.
Oh,
mechanical
oh,
equipment.
okay. I'm sorry. I got lost.
I-
Say-
That's
the
We
industry
do not have a
term for it.
requirement.
that's an
Not my
HOA
industry.
Yeah, we
type
don't have a
level.
requirement for that in the
Yeah.
UDO.
Okay.
That would be.
So that we're going to leave that to the HOA.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. And then one more thing in 1003 maintenance. There was just a word there, and it's on the third line, it will be jointly and severally responsible.
What number are you?
I'm on
1003.
1003
10.03 maintenance.
Third
The-
line.
Third line down, fifth word in. The sentence didn't make sense to me.
I don't know what severally means, but
It's a legal term. I don't know.
Yeah.
When screening is required, will be jointly and severally responsible for the maintenance of all. Severally?
I mean, it could be an HOA or other entity, but we can and look, I understand that this stuff is confusing, but that's also why you have a UDO administrator to help sort through it. We want to make it as clear for our citizens, but at the end of the day, it's got to be first clear for our UDO administrator as well. And so, yeah, I mean, I there's no dispute that this is confusing, but
Yeah, I think what they're trying to do here is 1003 refers to 1002C above, really. It's maintenance of that screening.
yes.
it's maintenance. I believe it's maintenance of everything, but we
Well,
would
it
have a
starts-
standard maintenance provision.
I agree
in
with you,
here.
Ron.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
it's addressing screening specifically.
Yeah.
Right, because it says, so I think what they're saying is if you got a probably multiple
Yep.
owned parking area that has
Yep.
screening,
Yep.
it's one and all.
Right.
It's one or all,
Mhm.
all or one are
Yep.
required for maintaining that screening.
Yep.
You can't get out of it.
Yes, but the reality is your maintenance section should
Yeah.
apply to everything that's required to either be preserved
right.
or planted,
Exactly.
not just screening.
Not just, and right now it's
Yeah.
focused on
Yeah.
screening. I
Yeah.
agree with Ron.
And screening was used 6 times in 6 lines.
All right, as Sybil, are we done with that? We move
Yeah,
on?
unless
10:04.
If I could, Mr. Chair, for 10.04 and 5,
okay, fine.
I know we've talked about the buffering. I know we're going to get into buffering strips. We're going to get into a lot of different things. The
Okay.
framework that Wes is prepared to lay out,
Would
let's
address buffering
in there.
okay.
It's if we could expedite 10.04 and 10.05, unless you got anything specifically, because the framework that how that's going to be laid out, Wes has kind of explained.
I do not.
Okay, and then 10.05 for residential, the point system that is laid there is, in staff's opinion, is really good.
It works.
Yeah.
It works.
The only question I had on that is, in the table, we seem to have a break point at 9,000 square feet on a lot,
Oh,
which doesn't seem to be appropriate since we're at 10,000 now.
What in section 10.05?
Yeah, it's A, 10:05A.
Mainly lots seem to have a division point of 9,000, but really, our recent legislation is the lot size ain't smaller than 10 anyway.
In
So should that table just be updated to 10?
But there's a lot. I mean, we could update that to 10, but
Right.
I mean, there's already a fair number of lots that are out there that are smaller.
Yeah, but they're already done.
They
Well,
You mean a lot that hasn't
they're
been built on yet?
non-conforming, but they have not been developed yet.
There's some that haven't been developed yet, but yeah, we can move it to 10.
Right. I just
It-
seem
I don't
odd-
think I don't think it's necessarily a big.
Chad, do
Change.
you disagree? Do you have heartburn with changing it to 10? I think
do
I think
not.
for uniformity, Ron has got a point.
Okay.
But
Because most of the lots that I look at are probably under that threshold or on the island.
Mhm.
So
the
Oh,
in the point system, I would like us to give more emphasis to drug tolerant materials. We do have 3 points for utilizing xeriscaping
Xeriscaping.
methods, which is drug tolerant, and it's only 3 points. I think drug tolerance is something that we need to magnify. I'd suggest
Here's
Wes
the-
considering
here-
bumping that up.
here's the thing with that, and this came from John Michaud because I've talked to him briefly about this. I don't think either one of us has ever given points for that because it has never come down to that being the thing we look at that pushes them over the
A
threshold.
deal breaker.
Correct.
Mhm.
Everything else is along in this planting schedule, including sod and irrigation,
Mhm.
exceeds the points that they're required to get. It has never come down to that thing as me checking off a box that pushes them over the threshold.
Okay.
So I'm not saying it's not needed, but I've never given points at it because I've never.
So you're saying it works?
it works.
Okay. We kind of moved through 1004. I think we did that with unanimous consent, and we are in 10.5. That was my only comment in 10.5. If Chad thinks 10.5 works, we do need to change under subdivision street trees. Bravo, this is in 10.04. I'm sorry, 10.05. B, subdivision street trees. Number 5, under B, it talks about locating the trees between the pavement and the sidewalk. I think we've already seen situations where that doesn't work.
Yeah, it doesn't work
Yeah.
because of the thing where,
Utilities.
such as a couple subdivisions that we've approved in the past years, that sometimes that between the sidewalk and the trees is either in the right of way, or on the private property. That's where they've had to do it. Like
bird watch.
Yeah, correct. See, because those are on the property, along with the street trees.
Well, can you add unless utility
I-
interferences or other
I
changes?
can also add in this is that the Brunswick County does not want anything planted on top of their utilities in
Sure.
the right of way. So that's the other thing that comes into this.
But my point is, I think the subdivision developers need to have not a period at the end of sidewalk, but have an exclusion. Because you could say that they have to go before the Board of Adjustment to get the tree space relocated. And you really don't have the authority to just void this unless it said, unless utility interference.
I do not, and I
is
also
appropriate.
I would not want to burden somebody with having to go through the board or a board of any, just Board of Adjustments, or this board, whatever, just to implement something or move something 5
It's
feet.
common sense.
Yes,
Well, but give yourself the common sense ability to make that change. Right
Yes.
now, you don't have that authority.
correct. I would love to have the
Okay.
authority to be able to do
You
that.
see what I'm saying?
So you need like,
Wes?
you're saying like a comment unless interference by utilities
Or by whatever Chad
Or-
has come up with.
So are you saying outright exempt it? Period.
No,
Don't,
no,
or
just
give
saying
them-
it needs
give
to
them
be
an
there
unless, an exception.
unless
No,
the trees need to be between the pavement and the sidewalk
Okay.
unless utility interference can't be changed, or some wording that gives,
In which case,
What
then they
about
have to go into.
roots growing and disrupting the road or the sidewalk and breaking it up? And everybody who has a driveway knows that happens, whether it's close to it or not.
Yeah, I mean, so does the direction of the board generally want to require subdivision street trees, period, in some form?
yes.
Yes.
Okay. The
No.
question is where, dependent upon when they're putting together their plan set, I guess. And
Right.
so,
Because we've had one that came up where they couldn't follow this, right?
Yes, there was.
The sidewalk was closer to the street and the trees are on
mhm,
the house side of the sidewalk.
yeah,
So I think we're trying to get to is give the building department, right now, it doesn't say they have any
Yep.
leeway. They got to put it between the sidewalk and the street. We're saying that's maybe the preferred way,
Yep.
unless utility or some other things get in the way, they can put it
Yep.
secondarily between the property and the sidewalk.
You can come up
Correct.
with some language
Yeah,
that satisfies
I'll
your.
say this because I don't want to. I want to hold on to Sybil's thought because I want to come back to it, making sure that she's heard on that one. But also, in the TRC, between the TRC comments that come back from Brunswick County Utilities, where these trees should be, Dustin, me, and the developer, we already do that.
Well, but you're violating our UDO.
I don't want to say I'm violating the UDO, but yeah, it's required. So we're finding a way to make it a requirement that
Okay.
meets the needs for everything.
You
else.
seem like you're resisting giving yourself that option in the wording.
No, I'm just saying it's probably already being done right now. It's part of the landscaping plan that comes before y'all.
Yeah, but also there's a big deal about street trees are not to be included in a landscaping plan. And if you don't specify where the street trees are, then somebody can take credit for those street trees because they needed to be moved from utility,
Right.
moved onto their property, and now they're counting.
Yeah, I'll defer to what Wes will put into
Okay.
this. And Sybil,
Wes, are we giving you?
yes,
launching point here?
and this is going to go into the subdivision section. This should not be.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
It is.
Yep.
It's,
should not
it's,
be.
it's
here.
only in
Yeah,
subdivision.
Yep.
and Sybil made a point. I want to come back to it. Miss Sybil, what did you say?
Tree roots.
Yeah.
Tree roots.
Tree roots.
You're requiring them. They've got to be there. And then the sidewalks and the road, depending on where it is in relationship to it, it's going to affect them. So I don't know why we are saying that they have to be there. I would rather have a safe sidewalk and a safe road and move the tree elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, I think to that point, and this is something that we dealt with in town I'm from in New York, and where we might need an arborist. There are species of trees where their root growth is straight down, as opposed to many trees, oaks in particular, that kind of wind out and can be very disruptive to sidewalks. So that
But
may
are
be
those
something.
trees indigenous to this area?
I'm
That
not
would
an
be the next-
arborist, but I bet we
There's
could
certain
find out.
species of elm that tend to grow in that fashion.
Yeah, usually
but,
the bottom of the tree looks just
um,
like the top of the tree.
Right.
but
I don't know that we, in the UDO, we can satisfy all of those things, particularly something
Does the
like
town,
tree
Chad,
roots.
have a
It's-
sidewalk replacement policy?
No,
Where I was from, the same issue occurred. The town paid for half of a fixing of a sidewalk. If a homeowner had a sidewalk buckled in front of their house because a tree root,
it'd be
But-
this.
they would hire and they would split the cost of fixing the sidewalk.
it depends
But
on whose sidewalk it is.
If the town is already requiring it, then the town pays for the sidewalk.
Well, I'm just saying that
I-
where I lived had the policy of that to kind of, because they did have trees in what we call the parkway, the area between the sidewalk and the street was required when you, and if you had a disrupted sidewalk, they would split the cost with the owner to fix it.
That would
So-
have to be something that would be figured out. If
I-
it was a town street that was accepted, and the sidewalk then was on public right of way, it would be the responsibility of the town.
The town
But
fixed the
but
sidewalk.
if it was in an HOA, it was a private street, then
It's up to the HOA.
and then it's up to the HOA.
But if it's in an even if they have an HOA, the town required it, not the HOA.
Well,
But-
the
but-
town also requires roads to go through there
That's
too.
right. So I mean,
I'm sorry.
So the town also requires roads to go through there. And
So-
if they're not
yeah.
built or adopted by the
Yeah.
town, then ultimately through a neighborhood, the HOA is responsible for those roads and sidewalks in the neighborhood.
Can we get on to
Of course, let's not talk about trees.
a very important, not, this isn't important, it is, but I don't know that we're going to solve sidewalks and tree roots right now.
I would just add that the size of the trees that they're planting, this root issue is probably a couple of decades off. So
Not our problem. Is that what you're saying?
Well, it
Well-
will occur later, yeah. But
yeah,
The 10.06 is tree preservation.
Mhm.
Hello. And in my own, this was addressed in something that Chad came up with in some in a staff initiated report that followed a planning board meeting where we talked about single family on. I'll get to the item. 1006C is in Charlie, which talks about requiring a permit for heritage tree removal. I always had a big problem with the fact that it said, except a lot occupied by a single family home. And I think Chad came up with striking that from the, now as Ron said, that went away because all of a sudden we had really a background issue. And to move in that direction was going to be, difficult at that time in that political atmosphere. But Chad, do you remember that?
Vaguely.
All right. That's something that I'd like to reinforce with Wes, is that under 10.06C, permits required, that a permit should be required to remove a heritage tree. Now, I agree it needs to be of a certain size, but and there needs to be remediation processes where if you have a 12-inch one, you can replace it with three 3-inch ones somewhere else on your property or somewhere else. So that's my
on
strong feeling.
on
Yes.
single
Can I ask a
family.
question? If a storm came through, hurricane came through, and took one of my beautiful heritage trees and ripped it all the way down, and so I knew the tree was going to die, I've got to come and get a permit before I can have that taken down?
dependent upon, if we add in a provision that specifies that, that's correct.
Because I had that happen.
Yeah. Now, some places will
Broke my
allow
heart.
they will allow trees to be taken down within a certain time period.
Our UDO right now gives us
Yeah,
that benefit.
3B.
It's
You can do that now, but if you
I have to
modify,
get a permit.
No,
No.
but it's a reason for applying
permit.
to take that tree down.
But to me, that's just common sense. You don't need a permit. You don't need somebody to tell you you can do it.
Well,
But somebody's going to say it's diseased. I think they need to prove that it's diseased.
Well, this was not disease. This
It was injured.
Well,
Yeah,
it says disease, injured, or in danger of falling close to an existing or proposed structure.
Yeah.
and
And
again, I hate to see a sledgehammer used to solve an ant problem. I beg someone to tell me how many trees we lose in this town because homeowners are doing it. I just don't think it's a big problem.
I
Except
know in
except
the
that exactly what Sybil says. A storm occurs, branches are falling, and then you say, well, that tree now is leaning towards my house or whatever, and then somebody takes, it's a big deal to take a tree out near your house. So I'm a little hesitant to, people own their property. The house is worth $450,000. I guess my libertarian side says the discretion or the goes to the homeowner in deciding that that tree is unsafe around his house, and we got to be careful on either specifying some distance, like you said, outside the setback area, where maybe we have a little more control. But to me, the benefit of doubt should go with the homeowners. It's their land, it's their trees, it's their house. I just don't see it's a big problem.
Chad, what does staff think about that? Do you agree with Ron?
I would just like to add, next door to me, a gentleman took down 12 loblolly pines. Okay. Now he got permission through the HOA. I'm not even sure if he went to the town.
he wouldn't have had to.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
I don't think it's as uncommon as you might think.
It's not a heritage tree, so he
Not
doesn't have to get a
heritage tree,
permit.
doesn't even what we're
Yeah.
talking about. You
But-
take down
but-
pines
but
all you
yeah,
want.
even if I mean it's up to you guys. I
Chad,
mean,
what do you think? Staff is important in this.
Yeah.
consideration.
It's
What do you
one of
think
those
about
things
what
where
Ron
I
said?
kind of lean on if it's hazardous to them or the neighbor, especially in the region and area we live in with what we are susceptible risk wise. I think who am I to tell them no, they can't take it out?
Well, you tell them if they can put a fence up or not.
yeah,
Yes.
but that's
That's
a
a
different
change. That's the opposite.
Um,
You're adding human
You know,
structure.
it becomes one of those things where before the situation that's civil, before it falls down, it's okay to get a permit. After it falls down, then it.
I
I think that's where it comes into hazardous having.
How
a
about
definition.
changing the wording then? I'm going to make a suggestion that's middle ground here, that we don't exclude single-family homes, but that we put that a permit is not needed and then lists the things as to what they're not needed for.
Okay. That could happen. I guess I mean, I know we don't necessarily want to be reliant on the HOA, but
No.
it had not occurred to me to gather how much the town is already under the purview of an HOA for tree removal. But yes, we could do as Pete alluded to say that you can remove a tree if it's within a certain distance of their structure or the property line, or
Or diseased, or...
yes.
Do you agree with that, Ron?
Well, that didn't get how you yeah. Yeah. Well, I guess my basic premise is I don't think this is the biggest part of the tree downing problem. So
Well-
I just hesitant on putting too many restrictions on existing homeowners. It seems like they're the best. Now there's always I don't see a homeowner in Sunset Beach willy-nilly cutting down trees
That's right. I mean, you typically are not
I mean, I
taking
guess
out
there-
trees unless there's
There's a reason
there's
for
a
it.
reason,
One, it costs you, I don't know what, the one I took, $800 to $1,000.
It's at least $1,000.
To cut
More than
down a
that if you
tree.
take the stump out.
it's a
Oh,
lot.
And then
Oh.
you got, so so I'd be hesitant to put too many restrictions. I would, to me, in this case, I'm leaning towards the homeowner to use due discretion on only removing trees that they've judged to be hazardous, diseased, partially
Well,
diseased.
put that in the writing then.
Right.
I'll go back and say this as we finish this up and finish up Article 10, is that lean on what Wes has listened to here to come up with something that will work. It's not going to solve every problem, but it's going to keep us legal, and it's not going to solve everybody's comments up here. Everybody's not going to be happy with this, but it is something that will work, be enforceable, and will keep the town legal in the long run.
Okay.
it-
And that's,
it-
we're talking about residential.
So,
'cause-
I'm
but
talking about
I
Article
think
10 in
Chad is
general.
right, but I think on this one it may warrant a vote on. Do you want to require a permit, or I guess Pete is saying just put the stipulations in.
For why a permit is not needed,
Okay.
which I think that satisfies everybody's
it's-
comments.
Is that
Well, can we include language that essentially says the town will defer to the policy of the HOA in terms of
Cannot do that.
No.
can't do
No.
that? Yeah.
Okay.
But if the HOA is already regulating it to a certain degree, then again, I think I tend to be on the side of not getting into business of you got a home. If you want to take a tree down on it for whatever reason, typically you're not just going to shell out $1,000.
because I can see that.
It provides no benefit to you really.
Yeah.
You lost your tree cover, and
Right.
I mean, look, when we some rental properties that we have, one of the requirements is that there's not trees on it because I don't want to pay to take them down.
All right.
But so
Come back with us with your. I think you've satisfied the planning board
Okay.
that
Yeah.
you're going to take what our general comments are and come up with the best solution that
Because the
that
insight,
protects trees but also doesn't step on the rights of individual homeowners.
Okay.
because the insight that I have is if the town creates a permit situation, you could have a situation where somebody comes, gets a permit from the town, and basically blows off the HOA and can say, "Hey, listen, the town gave me a permit."
Well,
Well, if
that's
that happens, here's the thing. If that happens, it's between you and the HOA.
yeah,
but
we're
this
out of it.
removes that as it's fine.
Yeah.
We're not going to create that confusion.
There's
by
a lot of
adding
places that
another
are not
layer.
HOAs. I'm not in an HOA. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I think we finished with 6
10.
and 10.06.
Yeah, I think
And now we
we're
go to
pretty much-
tree clearing provisions, which I had a problem with 10.07, Charlie 5.
Can I stop and go back one question?
Sure.
On Appendix C, is the board inclined? We have an Appendix C now.
Yes.
Are we happy with it?
No.
Or the suggestion was made the first years ago was that we spend money and get a tree expert, an arborist, to basically review Appendix C and what we call our heritage tree and plant list.
so
Do we want to do
there's-
that in this process or at some other time?
two things. One, the cooperative extension has fantastic tree lists that we can pull from, and we can determine what's native, drought tolerant, etc. There's two things here. One is I think we are going to propose a different definition of heritage trees in line with what we had discussed.
We haven't gotten to that yet, so it's,
Yes, and we haven't gotten to that, but the other difficulty with new construction, when someone's putting together a landscape plan, a landscape contractor, a landscape architect may spec certain species, but a contractor may say, "Hey, look, we don't have that in availability," and typically what does get planted, and a lot of times it may not be native, but it's something that has a history of being able to adapt and survive in this environment. That being said, you can require all native species if you want. If you bring a landscape architect in here or a landscape contractor, they'll tell you that that's not exactly, that's not exactly an easy thing to do, from the reality of putting plant material on a
Can
site.
we do what Ron said, though? Can we
Yeah.
hire, and I'll ask Chad, can we
Sure.
hire a consultant to work with our Appendix C?
You can,
And they
outside of
can,
this.
because
Yeah.
the extension people really only provide you lists. They're not going to come in and give you a whole bunch of hours of consulting time.
No,
Sure.
we were distributing that. We had that whole packet.
Yes.
Part of that other meeting notes was
Mm-hmm.
the multiple packet of information to replace Appendix C.
Yeah, I have it here.
Okay, so I guess only my question is, in part of this process, are we going to do something about Appendix C, or we're not? That's all I'm
I,
asking.
I
right now.
would typically review it if you want to move towards a
I guess I
more,
don't expect you guys to be tree experts
well,
or plant experts. Maybe you are, Wes. I don't know.
I mean, my wife's a landscape architect, and I have a degree in landscape
Okay,
architecture.
I didn't know that. So.
But if you want to have more of a native species basis, you can do that. I'm just providing you the background of what typically occurs. You can go make the extra step of requiring an as-built for what goes and is put in the ground. Actually, we have one community that does that, so that
Can we, I think it would be powerful if we had an exclusion. In other words, this is what you cannot plant.
got it.
Because there's certain, like a Bradford pear, there's
Yeah.
certain things that we all know now we don't want.
Yep.
Um,
That would be a species that I would take out, for example. Yep.
You asked what staff thought of this.
yes.
I'm more leaning toward using the expertise of the cooperative extension and the consultant, mainly for the reason of they often think about kind of the common sense of
When
what
you say consultant, do you mean the landscape architect that's working on a
the
subdivision?
cog
Oh, COG. Okay.
working with,
Yep.
and the reason why I've worked with an arborist on this specifically in the past, and it got to the point where the draft that was written up was, unless you were an arborist, you couldn't enforce it. So it becomes to a point where you have to apply the common sense to it. I'm not against arborists. I don't have anything against arborists, but the way they wrote it, and then unless you are an arborist or trained to understand what tree canopies are and critical root systems and stuff like that, you couldn't go out and explain it to
The
Joe
development
Smith
community.
development
Community,
community and force it.
Mhm.
So it came to the point where I was going to have to go get landscape and arborist training to be able to enforce one of those sections in our ordinance.
All right, Wes, I think you're hearing us saying that Appendix C needs some work.
Yep.
There's some things in there that aren't native at all, that don't belong around here.
Sure.
And there's some things in a subsection of that we want to say, don't plant these.
Yep. One of, and that being Bradford pear. Is there anything other that you know off the top of your head that is not preferable?
Some people hate palm trees. I happen to like
Now,
them.
I'm not going to go that path, but I tend to agree they're not native, but
They're not.
folks have an affinity of those. And unfortunately, they're one of our few they actually do provide shade on the island. They're sand tolerant.
Yes.
And so I agree. I don't like them either, but they can be effective in proximity to salt.
I don't have anything other than Bradford pear that I know of.
Yeah.
My neighbor has 12 of them.
I would have to get the wife's my landscaping expert, so
Yep.
All right, well,
I just handled a lot.
the rest of the board, Richard and Sybil, are you on board with kind of him moving forward and we see what he comes up with?
And I think we're good now. Is this something that we can incorporate into the point system in terms of perhaps creating an incentive for certain trees and disincentivizing others?
Well, the point system does that, doesn't it?
It
It talks about trees.
gives you 10
You're talking
points
about
for
existing
saving
point
3
system?
trees.
Well, it sounded like this is
We can put in here.
I kind of like that idea.
Again, Look, I don't want the whole town
Like
to,
I wouldn't, every
I-
tree that's on this list, I wouldn't, but there may be certain trees that we
Like a
really
live
want to
oak.
incent and
Yes.
say, hey,
Yeah.
if you put these trees in, we will give you points.
Yep.
The rest of these trees, fine, they're good, but no points.
Yep.
Okay.
We are up to,
Tree clearing.
yes, 10:07. And I think that we've probably beat this to death already in our preamble of the meeting. I think Wes has a good idea on the pulse of what the board, the direction of the board.
Well, I guess I'm concerned because I see 10:07, no change recommended. And I think the sentiment of the board in the beginning of this meeting is, yes, we need to change this. Would that be your impression as well, Wes? Or
Well, so there is this section 1007 D that really speaks to, I think needs to be modified to some degree, but I think that if we can figure out how to make this a bit more clear, for example, which we can do, but
well, for instance, in that clause, I mean, we refer kind of casually to undeveloped and properties that are zoned residential or non-residential.
Yep.
I mean, should this be something that goes into a permitted use table? It says, okay, MR3, here's the standard. MR2, here's the standard.
Mhm.
And then have those standards being very specifically written for those specific zoning. Because obviously in a commercial environment, the clearing, I mean, what they did here in terms of clearing out the trees and creating the parking lot, that standard would probably be different than some of the other zoning. Is that a way to address this?
Let me. That's a good example. The parking lot next door to town hall. I think that if we moved more towards a, preservation based system where, yes, you can clear the lot, but there's certain things that you may need to keep. If there's a 25-inch live oak on site, or a couple, maybe you need to keep one of those and you need to plan around it. And then on the periphery, in the setback areas, for example, anything that's above a certain size, 5, 6, 7 inches, also needs to be retained. And that way you can grade the site, barring, a couple of key areas that you maybe need to keep your elevation the same. That 25-inch live oak is going to have a canopy spread that's much more effective than a couple 8-inch trees or putting back, several 2-inch trees.
Well, the issue with live
And that's the direction I think.
Can you incorporate that then?
Yes,
'Cause I
that's the
think
direction.
Do I get a consensus that everybody on the board supports that?
So let me understand, are we talking about differentiating these standards according to the zoning? No. So we're basically saying we have residential standard, like Sybil has asked, a residential standard and a non-residential standard in terms of potential development, potential additions or changes to an existing structure. I'm sorry.
You can only find it.
I know. I'm sorry, lost my train of thought. So is that what we're doing here, or?
Well, there'd be new development, whether it be subdivision or commercial or multifamily, that would have certain requirements. We will have, for existing platted lots, certain stipulations for when you can take out a tree. And then for new construction single family, there'll be the point system as well.
Okay, so basically we're subdividing into 3 or 4 categories, and there'd be a different standard for each one.
Yes,
Okay.
but but the gist of it, we're going to try to go towards, hey, look, we understand that there's a certain amount of this site that's going to need to be cleared to accommodate things.
Right.
However, you've got one of these fantastic specimen trees on site. Let's try to figure out how to keep that and plan around it.
To me, I think, well, again, it's the biggest problem and the most concern from the residents is when they see a big square removed of all trees.
Yes.
And I was trying to address in my proposal, which may or may not work, is right now, because of stormwater and recontouring the land, in my mind, and maybe Chad can correct me, developer has near zero incentive to try to figure out some trees to save.
Right.
And I was trying to come up with a system
Mhm.
that one made them survey it first of all.
Well, they're required to do that.
Well, not by species and size, I don't think.
Well,
But
I
anyway,
think they're-
and then give high value
Yep.
to those trees so that at least the developer, when he looks at his big map of the square and he says, I got to put a pond here and I got to do this. But look, this area here, I'm really not doing anything with it. Some incentive for them to say, what trees are there? Maybe we should save those. So that's the system I tried to come up with, is give a high value to high value trees to be saved
Yep.
as opposed to be replaced.
Well, that's
If
what
you
we're
read
going
those
for.
minutes of March
Yeah.
2020, you'll get what the
Now,
points
it
he's
might not
bringing up.
work. You can look at that trade maker and say, this ain't going to work. But
But
that's
you
what I was trying to do. Because right now, I think the way I see it, and maybe I'm wrong, developer looks at their big square of their property
Mhm.
and says, I got to do all this stormwater and utility stuff, so I'm just clearing it. Okay, because the state says that's what I got to
Sure.
do. And then says, okay, I'll put a little bunch of these little sticks in
Yep.
afterwards because that's what the town tells me I got to do.
But
There's
over
just nothing-
time, they will become part of
not in my lifetime.
the
So I was just trying to create a system that says,
Mhm.
as a developer, I can save myself from having to replant a million little sticks.
Yep. That's
If I take a look at my site and say there's certain areas with good trees,
that's
put
what
the
we're
trees in the planning process of the contouring of the land.
that's what we're going to try
So
to.
that's what I
move
tried
toward.
to do.
That's what we're going to try to
Right.
move towards.
So that would be, in terms of these 4 or 5 categories, that framework would be for new development.
Yes.
Okay. And then we'd have a different protocol for commercial or
Well, I mean, if it's new development, commercial, or just
New-
like the parking lot there, or subdivision.
okay. Well, I look forward to seeing it.
All right.
Article 11.
Yep. Everybody agree to move on to 11?
Sybil, are you happy?
sure.
11 is sign regulations.
Oh boy.
Doesn't matter, does it?
Now, we have spent quite a bit of time, and I'd like not to regurgitate that, but we've spent quite a bit of time recently on monument signs for residential entrances, subdivision entrances, and non-residential use within a residential subdivision. And however, signs are important to be dealt with because fewer signs is better than more signs. We had a gentleman that made a comment before about feather flags. And sir, I think I owe you an apology because we were starting off in 10 and you started to talk about feather flags. Which
Mr.
is in
Chair.
11, which is what we're on right now. So that was part of our agenda. I apologize.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
if I may, I know you apologize. I want to let you finish on this. I think this might be an appropriate time to allow him to say what he has to say.
That's where I was going.
Okay.
Sir, would you like to make a comment at the podium, please? All right. And thank you for being patient with me.
That's right.
My name is Barry Engel, and I live here in Sunset Beach, and I have a business in Sunset Beach. We have been in business for over 4 years, and we have had a feather flag in front of our place for over 4 years. This Chad came by, was very nice, said that the county has an ordinance that says you can't have a feather flag. he was nice enough to email me a copy of the ordinance, and I'm just going to go over some points in the ordinance.
Okay.
One of the ordinances in section 1 or 11.2, item C, says it is also acknowledges that the town's economic well-being is heavily dependent upon tourism. This dependence makes the preservation of the environment from unreasonable signs a matter of critical importance to the town. If we can't have people know we're open and be able to get them into our store, we're out of business. People have been looking for that flag to come in for years. The flag was down yesterday, as per requested, and customers, they go by and then they come back because they see my wife is in there. But they said, we just kept going because the flag wasn't up. We didn't think you were open. I understand the predicament based upon what's here, but I think that you need to take into consideration a small businessman and being economically feasible for him to be able to draw customers to his establishment. Many people feel that I would assume that feather flags are a problem. It says in here I can put a 25-foot pole and put a flag on it, and I don't need a permit or anything else. Just to put a 25-foot flagpole, and I can put 3 of them in front of my building. Now, 1 feather flag versus 3 25-foot flagpoles doesn't add up. As well as from a cost standpoint, it doesn't add up. So I would beg for the planning committee to take that feather flag out of the comments. The other thing is, I looked up the
30 seconds, please.
Okay, I looked up for the regulations. I couldn't find it on the town page. So you need to make it easier for us to find the addendums and amendments to this. Thank you.
Can I
Thank
ask
you, sir.
a question?
Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am.
No deliberation
Can't.
with
Oh.
in public comments.
Never mind.
Okay.
We're not allowed to deliberate back and forth, sir.
Okay.
Just for information, I wasn't deliberating.
Chad might be able to fill us in.
A
You can
comment-
ask your question to Chad.
Thank you, sir. A comment to Chad that in 11.4, I have a comment in margin notes. I say to be business friendly, and particularly for special events, and that feather flags of a certain size should be allowed. That's just my own comment in my margin notes.
Yep, and I've known that.
And Sybil, I wasn't trying to be rude, but we are not allowed to deliberate back
Yeah,
and forth.
so I can
I
probably.
can't ask a question.
You cannot. Yeah.
You can ask Chad the question,
Yes.
because
which
he
is
may
what
know
I
the
just did.
answer.
Is the flag up 24 hours a day, or is it just up when he's open?
I would assume that I've seen some of the flags I've found as I've gone out through businesses are just up when they're open. Some of them are up and left up 24 hours.
Most of them are up all the time.
So across the region, folks regulate these differently. A substantial number of folks prohibit them outright. A substantial amount of folks also do allow them, but they'll have stipulations that they can only be open during business hours, for example.
And I thought that's what we had done. So I'm rereading this article now, and I'd have to go back to the other minutes.
We haven't done that.
But I thought when we redid this, when I first came on, so that'd be 4 years ago,
Yeah.
that I thought that's what we tried to do, that these portable signs, little A-frame signs, feather flags, had to be removed.
A feather flag's different than a
Yeah, I know what a
apron.
feather, but they're portable too. You got a little weight on the bottom, and there's a little stand, and you can put them up, and you can take them in. I thought what we tried to achieve, now maybe we blew it, was that kind of stuff was okay during business hours, but had to be removed during non-business hours.
So I wasn't here, but as far as how I've read the ordinance,
It says that feather flags are prohibited. So
Yeah.
section 11.4.
Right.
11.4, yeah.
Well, would we? I think in terms of feather flags, and I mean, we may be.
Well, let's start at 11 and get to feather flags.
Yes.
That's at
Yeah.
11.4.
Great.
11.1 is of the purpose, and I'm going to agree with something Sybil said. I think our purposes at the start of each of our sections tends to be confusing and convoluted. But I'll just let that pass. But Wes had said no changes recommended in purpose. Then under 11.2, not trying to rush it, but if nobody has any particular comments about 11.1, 11.2 is Wes had indicated to move 11.2 to section 11.1, C as in Charlie, which I didn't have any problem with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then 11.3, signs exempt from permitting requirements.
I just had a question on the third dot. Is political sign the correct definition according to North Carolina? Not a candidate sign or?
So
Or election signs.
Yeah, what is there
the
is there an
statute-
official North Carolina definition? Because they control what's on the highway road right away, it's right. So they
yes, which by the way, this statute is also in violation of Supreme Court case law, but we defer to it in our local governments, and if someone wants to sue the state over it, great. We'll just defer to it. But it's political signs is the terminology that's used, not election signs.
But there can be a big difference.
there could be a big difference.
One
Yeah.
represents a candidate or a party or a candidate, and the other one could be a political statement.
That would be something that you would allow on your the political signs. They are intended and they are drafted around elections. So they're allowed a certain number of days before the first day of early voting, etc. Those are tailored specifically to, if Pete, you're running for office, so you can put your
No, thank you.
I know. But you can put your sign out in the right of way adjacent to a property owner that's given you permission. And I understand, I get your question there. If you're taking a position on something versus advocate,
candidate.
yes.
Advocating, I guess.
So they are election signs in that sense, but the statute refers to them as political signs.
Can we put, how does the board feel about allowing political statement signs, just as a general?
Well, you're allowed to do it.
So that would fall under
Yeah.
signs that are not required for yard signs.
Yard
Each
signs.
lots in
Yeah.
residential zoning district shall be allowed one yard sign not
Yeah.
exceeding
Yeah.
6 square
Yeah.
feet,
Mhm.
4 feet in height.
Okay, and that's the way you would enforce that?
Yes.
Okay.
You're allowed
So
one.
if somebody wanted to put up a sign that said Blue Lives Matter or
Yes.
Black Lives
Yep.
Matter,
Yep.
or
They're allowed one.
they're allowed one, and there are
On
dimensions.
private property.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
All right, are you satisfied with
Well,
what Wes said about
I'm
political?
satisfied that, yeah.
If
So
I
my question was the official definition according to the state. In other words, on item S, the heading says election signs and ours, and you said
It needs-
replace that with political sign because that is the official definition.
That's the way they refer to it. We want to defer directly to their statute. We don't want to have our own. Let the state,
Right.
But we can have our own when it comes to the timing of them. Like election signs are only allowed a certain number of weeks
That's-
in advance of an election and must be removed within like 48 hours
That's-
of voting.
That's the statute, the state statute.
Okay, that still is the state.
That still is
That
the
is-
state
So you're
statute.
recommending on this section is just say follow the state.
Because the
Oh, and forget
Supreme
all this other
Court
language.
case says that you have to be content neutral. And in that case, if we are going by the Supreme Court case, we could not call something a political sign.
Okay.
But if the state has that statute, they haven't changed it. I would recommend that we just defer to that.
All right,
If
I
I-
think we are up to 11.4.
If I could interject real
Please.
quick on that specific one, there's two things that become problematic to staff. One is the permission slip that each candidate have to fill out. It's very troublesome to track every candidate down to get them to sign a permission slip. The second part of that is it's also very troublesome to try to explain, especially not calling out any. I'm going to call out Sea Trails specifically, but not, and be very clear and blunt with this. it's very hard to describe somebody where the right of way start and ends throughout C-Trail. And I ran into that issue when it came to enforcing the sign placement for political signs within the past 2 years.
Within C-Trail.
Within everywhere, but more specifically C-Trail, because it's very hard, even when I'm got my iPad out there for staff to go out there, try to tell where I am, if I'm in the right of way or not in the right of way. So instead, I'd like to get away from, when it comes to private property sign placement, is as long as it's X amount of feet away from a roadway.
Where are you?
I am in
S2.
S11.3 S2.
Got it.
So instead of on private property sign placement, instead of giving them right of way language that I have to explain, make that allowable as long as we are X amount of feet off the highway or the road.
Does anybody have any problem with that on the planning board? I don't.
What's the question? How you want to do it?
I want to enforce it
It wants
not
to be
by
offset from the street.
It cannot be in the right of way. It has to be on private property.
Yeah.
So you're saying you don't want to allow them to put it in the right of way?
No, I don't have a problem with them being in the right of way. I just want to be
He
able
doesn't
to
want it
say,
defined that way.
I don't want to define it that way. I'd
That-
rather say,
Unfortunately,
have to.
we have to. That,
okay, even for private property on non-DOT roads.
So you can define on non-DOT roads where you do or do not allow
That's
them
what I'm more
specifically.
talking about.
Where
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
So for
What do you
non-DOT
think?
roads,
10 feet off
10
the road?
feet off the property line. Or, no, excuse me, off the road.
Off the pavement.
Yes.
So that
Travel
would
portion
allow
of the
them
roadway.
on any town street. So
Yes.
in some of our local governments, they only allow them on certain streets. That's difficult. But
Somewhere between 10 and 20 feet.
all right, you and I need to get. Sounds like they're okay with it.
You're
And-
proposing to do what? Allow it in that range off the street?
It has to be at least
Off the
10 feet,
pavement?
10 feet off the street, yes.
Yes.
Not within 10 feet of the street.
And you're talking only about town roads, town streets?
Talking about non-DOT roads when it
Okay,
comes
what
to
about private roads?
Same
That'd
thing.
be the same thing.
Non-DOT roads.
Well, I think, like in my neighborhood, 10 feet off the roads is in the forest.
I mean,
You only got 3 feet off the road to be visible because it's undeveloped lots and it's forest. So you don't have 10. The candidate doesn't have 10 feet. Only has about 3-4 feet, maybe 6 in some spots off the.
I'm just saying what has become very
Now,
troublesome.
Trail is different where you have a street and you have completely developed lot. But I don't. Wouldn't that put it in the property
these are-
owner's lot?
These are becoming very hard to enforce
It could.
for citizens to put political signs on their property. Well, we specifically say they cannot be in the right of way right now. Well,
And he has a hard time determining what the right of way is. Like in
and
front of my house, it's
explaining what the
13
right of way
feet,
is.
but in other places, it's not 13 foot.
Correct. So if we make it a standard somewhere between 10 and 20 feet from the pavement, whether it's in the right of way or not, for this election period that's governed under this general statute
Right.
of X
Because
amount
Ron,
of
are
days
people putting
before-
up political signs on vacant lots?
Not on the lot, but on the right of way in front of the lot.
Well-
I guess in my mind, I don't know, maybe I misunderstood. I'd rather have the political sign closer to the pavement so they can get rid of them easier. The further back they're putting them, they're going to blow away or be there.
So-
You're saying you want them further away from me? I want them.
No, he
closer.
just wanted to pick a dimension.
So
He
I'd rather
wasn't set
have
on
them in the
anything.
first 3 feet off the pavement.
So are you right now? Do you allow them outside of the NCDOT right of way, or only NCDOT right of way?
So we allow them, no, just in the NCDOT right of way. If you're not on an NCDOT road for political signs, they have to be on private property.
On your property.
Okay. So is that the position you want to continue to have?
Yes,
Okay.
but for non-DOT roads to make
But
them,
enforcement is an issue.
enforcement is an issue for that.
Because he doesn't know where the property line is.
And other citizens don't know where the right of way begins and ends.
So I think maybe it needs to be abundantly clear, more clear that no sign shall be placed in the right of way of non-DOT streets.
I'm okay with them being in the right of way. I just think at that point, making them X amount of feet off of a highway, unless you would
He's
say
trying
that's
to
just a bad
enforce the
idea.
regulation, and
know.
right now he can't.
Well, so the other thing is just to allow them outside of DOT right of way.
Yeah.
And you know, that's up to you guys. This is one of the most difficult things for staffs and local governments to deal with, because you are imparting your elected officials with, really being troubled by someone else's sign and saying you need to enforce it and so on and so forth. So during election season, it's not a fun time. Pulling signs and trying to deal with people complaining about someone else's sign is where it shouldn't be. So do you all have an issue with them signs being in the right of way everywhere, or do you just want to stick to certain NCDOT streets? And maybe what we need to do
On
is,
non-DOT streets, I think the sign should be allowed to be, I don't want to say anywhere, but anywhere.
I mean,
on the right of way.
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, it becomes one of those things where I'm trying to make this a lot more easier to enforce and not make this period of 60 days not fun for, I would say staff, but me.
Yes.
If you do that, then you're going to deal.
Non-DOT right-of-ways.
You're going to basically say any right of way in the town, you can put a political sign up, subject to adjacent property owner permission, which we don't necessarily check. I mean, there's not really a way for us
It's
to
not
do
adjacent property owner, it's property owner, isn't it?
that. Adjacent property owner.
It has to say that.
Yes.
Okay.
That's the way the statute's written. And so it may be your next cycle, you're going to have signs everywhere. And if it's too much, then you may have to address this again. But if everybody's fine with it, Chad's basically says, put your signs out there. Just make sure they're all gone. And
here's where this,
Non-DOT right-of-way.
and here's where this is coming from.
Non-DOT
The
streets.
candidates that represent and put these signs out are normally very good about their sign placement. It becomes Pete Larkin goes up to A or B candidates, I'd like to put one of your signs in my yard. Well, at that point, it becomes not the candidate putting the sign out.
Because the candidate doesn't know where I put it.
Exactly. And most of the time, the citizen doesn't know where property lines begin and end and where the right-of-way begins and ends. So it becomes when I go up, rip them out of the ground, they want to know, why the heck did you do that? And it's easy to enforce, but it's very difficult on the back end because of the
People are
yelling,
angry.
kicking, and screaming that I get when people come to my
Does the
office.
board agree that we should remove the description of right-of-way? We're going to call it in a non-DOT street situation. We're going to remove that right-of-way restriction.
basically you could put during this time period, you
period.
can put political signs everywhere.
In accordance
then-
with the general statute.
In accordance with the general statute, and then not off premise on not off premise on private property or
Right.
unless it's your property or whatever. But I mean,
Does everybody agree?
Yeah, and because I mean, this is as a recent candidate,
Yeah.
I couldn't put a sign up in Sea Trail. I put a sign up in Sea Trail, the candidates would, no, you can't put that here
Yeah,
because
but that
it's
was
right away.
that
Boom,
was
take 'em
that was Sea Trail.
out. Exactly.
Okay,
But
Well,
also,
we
I don't-
can't-
I
we're
think-
not here to address that.
But I
But-
will also say, I think, to getting to Richard's point, I don't think, and he can attest, I don't think there was a candidate during that election of a sign I did not take up. I think,
Yeah, no, it's the issue is I'm trying to convey signs in a legal way. There's confusion within Sea Trail. They're promoting certain candidates that I'm running against. They pulled my signs. Okay, I need to be able to go to them and say, hey, here's the regulation. You can't do that. Because what I got was, this is a right-of-way issue and you're not allowed
Yeah,
to
but
be
this
here.
would resolve that.
Yes.
yes. And it's probably me that picked it up.
Okay, can we
Well,
move
God
forward?
bless you.
Now that we've addressed that, can
Okay.
we move
Yeah.
on?
Yes. 10.4.
I'll
or
repeat
11.4.
what I said before about 11.4 prohibited signs. It is my desire, in order to be more business friendly, and to be supporting businesses that feather flags of a certain size. There are some that are very large, and I think they're more than just informational. They can be distractive. But of a certain size should be allowed, and particularly for special events like grand openings. I'm open for business. I have a sale. I have a special going on, so that it is an attention gatherer that can bring business into our commercial properties.
Yeah, I would concur with Pete on this, specifically, obviously, the size, removal during non-business hours, and I think the thing that can be a little is sometimes you'll see them where there's like a series of like 4 within a limited area. So if we can have something that, and I'm not, I know we can't have deliberations here. I'm not familiar with Mr. Engel's business and how he positions his flag, but have some stipulation in terms of, yes, you can have 1 flag, you can have 2 flags, but you can't have 6. Some number in there that allows a business to display a flag. And some of these businesses have been doing this for a long time. I mean,
to make it, and it's, Mr. Engel, and there was another handful of businesses. I think the general consensus of some kind of allowance across the board for them to be able to say, hey, we're open, that type thing, or, fresh seafood, whatever that might be. There can be limitations of it where you've got 1 or 2.
Would you
But I
want to
think
have them taken down
the general
when the business
consensus
closes in the evening?
Yeah, I mean, keep it, allow them, there could be an allowance from open operation hours, limitations to however many you can have, depending on what the board would
Or
like.
certain distance apart?
Just certain I think
Yeah,
the general
good point.
consensus of I would like, this can impede a business, especially in shopping centers where there's no signage for all these tenants
Sure.
there. And that was kind of general. They just want them to be allowed to some degree.
So we could, in fact, call them temporary feather flags of a certain size.
I would just, yeah, I
Certain
mean, you
spacing.
do allow temporary off-premise event signs and special event signs.
I would
at
stay
present.
clear of that.
But we exclude feather flags, so that means the sign has to be of a different style.
Right. I mean, I would think of these as they're there in a permanent fashion, but they may be removed daily.
Stay away from temporary because
Yeah.
there are certain days and limitations of how many times you can do that X amount of days
you're right.
in a year.
You're right.
But I think
You're
what
right.
we'll do is we'll put a separation distance, or we'll base it on the frontage, and then we may have to have a separate stipulation for a shopping center on exactly how those would
yeah,
be
that's a
handled.
good point.
But I've got language that we have other communities that have this in place. We'll put something in there, and then we'll just go from there.
And this
Right.
shows how public input is important in our thought process. So it's
Amen to
it's
that.
very good. 11.4, are we finished with that? 11.5, obsolete or abandoned signs. I thought that was fine. The way
Is
we're
the
dealing with
Magnolia
them.
sign still up?
Pardon me?
Is the Magnolia sign still up?
Is the Magnolia, what?
In
And
Seatrail?
I
For the
think
restaurant that doesn't exist.
it's a good question. I think they bricked it.
Yeah, I think they removed the line.
They were
Like they
free-faced
The
it.
structure's there, but the
Well,
sign's gone.
Structure's there.
Yeah.
Regretfully, they removed
But we-
sugar sands.
But we have a clause to govern that. Just has to be enforced.
Yeah, and it hadn't been for years, and I don't often go in that entrance to Seatrail, so
Right.
I wasn't sure if it was still there or not.
All right, so have we dealt with obsolete and abandoned signs, 11.5? I think we have. 11.6, traffic hazards and sign illumination. I thought the article was fairly well written. I was
Yeah.
reading
Table
Wes's
contents
comment
has
here.
an error, right.
Permit procedure. Chad, are you satisfied with the permit procedure for signs? You nodded affirmatively.
Yeah, I mean, it basically comes down to the permit procedures, and I kind of have my own, especially when it comes to non-residential entities. So I'm fine with it, yeah.
And
Do we
11,
have, I guess what I don't see, we do not have a maintenance section on, going back to the maintenance section that we had on
I
landscaping.
believe obsolete or
You think that covers
Yeah, I
it?
think that's where
Yeah,
11.5
that-
comes in.
and abandoned signs, but we can
But-
but we can add something in there about
Maintaining it to, I mean, it may not be obsolete.
there's something
It also, if you go
there's
here,
something else
it?
in
Yeah,
here
if you go
about prohibited
11.4.
signs. There's some
yeah, so 11.4
Well, where is it at?
T, it says any sign or flag that the UDO
Yeah.
administrator deems to be significantly worn, torn,
Yeah.
dilapidated, damaged, or otherwise in disrepair, such sign may be removed by the UDO administrator
Yep.
60 days after written notice to the owner.
Okay, all right.
I don't ever see that happen.
I,
but that's
I don't
okay.
often get that facial expression from you, Ron. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
All right, 11 points.
Not completely sold on that.
All right, 11.6, traffic hazards and sign illumination. Did we finish with that?
General standard.
11 point, and Chad said he was satisfied with 11.7, the permit procedure, and in the enforceability of that.
Hold on. 11.6. I have 11.6 as general standards, not
Yeah, it's named wrong.
traffic hazards and sign.
It's named wrong in the table of contents. I think
Yeah,
that's what
yeah. I made the comment to say update section
Oh,
name
you
and
did.
table of
I was
Yeah.
trying to read that, and I didn't
Yeah.
understand. Now
Yeah.
I
it is.
do.
The table
Yeah.
of contents is incorrect.
Yeah.
Yes, okay,
Okay.
yes.
So the correct name is general standard?
Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, I see that too. And now we go to 11.8, which I don't know that we need to spend much time on because we spent 4 meetings on it, and it's already been approved and passed by the town council.
Again, I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel here. I think what you might see, and that my wish would be to Wes, would be to move toward sign standards for non-residential entities and then residential entities, if that makes any kind of sense.
I mean, separate them more.
Yes.
Yeah. Difficult thing to do, and we'll incorporate your new changes. The only issue is that
You're aware of the 25-foot.
we'll that needs to get in here.
So it's
they'll-
8 feet by 25.
Yeah, and I'll send
Yeah,
you that.
yeah,
Wes.
and I've reviewed it.
Okay.
But yes, we've got. I mean,
And again,
typically there's a reason why you typically do not have a commercial use or whatever it may be in a residentially zoned area. That is, not the way that it's supposed to go, and so that's why you guys had to deal with that particular item. So
Okay.
well, and then there's the question, are we going to consider adding institutional sign category for religious in a government residentially zoned area? So this is a use other than residential in a residential zone.
This
So
would be-
we need to add that someplace, you're saying, right?
So this is where it may be a government facility, a park, or it may be a church, and that oftentimes there's issues with signage in that way. You don't have to, but it may be that if I recall the non-residential, the clause that just got added may be able to take care of that.
I think that looked at, well, it said, was that commercial uses in residential only would apply to adding the additional monument sign? I forget how we wrote that, or what the final version looked like.
I need to go back and look at
I'll
that.
go
In
look
any
at it.
case, is the board against having some allowance for a religious institution or whatever?
Well, I mean, here's where I think Wes is getting to. If you look at section 11.9, non-residential zoning district sign regulations, you got MB1, MB2. Oh, you do have RI in there. So
but I think you may have not sure if you have existing churches or institutional facilities.
yeah, we'll just have to look at the institutional facilities and incorporate that into 11.9.
But to answer your question, no, I don't think the board has any resistance or reluctance to kind of separate out religious institutions and things like that.
Yeah. Well, I think the intent was if there's a separate something, we addressed, I think, commercial,
Yeah.
maybe not these other, that they be allowed their one sign in
Yeah.
accordance with allowable sign.
Right.
So I guess the same would apply equally to a religious institution or government
Facility.
facility. I guess could be any, or you're talking about park.
Yeah.
Obviously comes to mind, a sign for the park seems reasonable.
Yeah.
But I don't know about like a fire station or a
Right.
police substation, or I guess in my mind it's okay. They should have one sign also.
Yes,
Okay.
because that's important to the community to be
That
able
they
to
know where it's at.
know where, yeah.
Post office, I
identify.
guess, whatever.
And
Okay.
and
So I guess,
quickly
yes,
from
Well,
staff,
and those would be called municipal and
government.
what, our zoning district is municipal and institutional, I think, is that zoning district we have.
Recreation and institutional.
Yeah, all right, yeah.
I forget.
and
Yeah.
this would be a question from staff to Wes. Is it still most of the time seen where you look at wall signs or marquee signs as far as square footage? So where it's 1 square foot per 2 linear feet, or is it lot frontage along a street or something like that? I mean, what are you mostly seeing
It
now?
varies. I mean, it depends on. If I recall, the scale you have, I think, is good. But
Okay.
if you've had issues,
Yeah, I think I've had some issues. I think my general wish would be just, I guess, as you see fit, update it to whatever, modernize it if it can be modernized.
okay. Let's go look at wall signs.
I didn't, I wasn't familiar with the blade sign definition, and there is no definition in our UDO for what a blade sign is, but it talks about it as a projecting sign.
Yeah, it was like a street sign.
It would be
straight sign off
say,
of-
say you're walking in a downtown area
Mhm.
and there's a sign that hangs down.
Perpendicular to the
Yep, that
flow of-
says what bookstore or whatever it may be.
Okay, all right, and it's there's size, there's illumination. Okay, thank you.
But
Because
we'll
we have a
make sure
definition
that
for about
there's-
22 different signs
Yeah,
in our
I'll make sure.
definitions, but not a blade sign.
I'll make sure that there's a definition.
All right, we're up to 1110 non-compliance.
11.9, right? What do we-
Well, I had just said 11.9, so I wasn't. I thought we were
Consider
through with it,
limiting
but-
the future use of freestanding pole signs in favor of monument sign. My answer to that would be yes, but I'm trying to find an 11.9
11.9 is
where
is-
that would be.
That's the whole section, and that would be at the very beginning, monument or freestanding signs, where you have a maximum height allowed of 16 feet, which I think is good. That's
Where,
not
where
a
are you? I'm lost here.
11.9.1A1.
Okay, got it. Got it. Got it. Yeah. What about that? I mean, that's a 16-foot tall sign.
I think that's
So we
good.
should just remove pole. We just need signs allowed being only monument sign,
That-
or
that's a question
freestanding, but
for-
not pole signs.
That's a question for the
Right. That's what I
board.
thought you were trying to
For
get
who? Is
us.
If you want to move away from freestanding pole signs and more towards a monument style sign, I typically think that they tend to be more aesthetically pleasing.
Sure.
But
Well, we can, when it comes to flags, obviously we want people to show the
and that's a different thing altogether.
So we should just move that period to over to monument and get rid of the or freestanding, right?
Well, it can be. I guess we just would. I will write it in such a way that it basically says it's got to be monument, et cetera. Can't be pole signs.
Okay.
Can be freestanding.
Okay.
But not pole sign.
But not pole signs.
Okay, I agree
Okay.
with that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody agree with that?
Yes.
Sybil, does that make sense? Okay, and Richard. All right. We're done with 11.9. We're on to 11.10, the last section here, non-compliance. Chad, do you like the wording that's in there now? Is there a reason to change it for non-compliance? Because it all falls on you, or most of it falls on you.
I think Wes is right, just to find code enforcement officer or, I guess more of a policy thing of how staff handles this. And, kind of go from there. I don't spend a lot of time in this or this section, to be honest with you.
It should be UDO administrator.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess the question that where we started on apparently we have a non-conformance now of non-compliance with certain types of portable feather flags, et cetera, in front of businesses at the moment, right? That you're enforcing.
Well, they're not a problem anymore because
Okay.
I enforced it. Yeah.
So, okay, so do we,
Yes.
I guess under a separate meeting, are we doing a text amendment? Because this ain't going to be fixed for a year. So you're going to propose a text amendment and issue it to the public for
I'm
comment?
working on some other things as far as businesses, especially with MB2. This will probably get brought up, to be honest with you. To some
So
degree.
there was a yes to his.
Pretty much,
Right.
yeah.
Because obviously, the process we're going through here, we may fix it eventually, but it won't fix it
For
in
a
the
long
near
time.
future. So you're going to propose something
Yeah, it'll
for us to
probably,
review or just the council to do to fix?
I think we have to. I'll bet you there's 20 of them within our municipality right now.
it will be addressed. So I've been if y'all have been paying attention to the council meetings, that the council has directed staff to look at the MB2 corridor as far as businesses, and I've been working with businesses and realtors in the area to work on being a little bit more user friendly in that and
Business friendly.
business friendly. And this is probably going to come up as one of those things that could help.
So
that.
this could
I
easily be
will rope it
incorporated
into
into
there.
that
Yeah.
without limiting it to MB2.
And given that we're working on this, I can help you on that language.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Satisfied?
11 o'clock.
We're at 2 hours. I'd like to entertain a motion that we continue on with this meeting. We need a unanimous vote to do it because I think we can very quickly get through Article 12, environmental regulations, because most of this is not something that we can influence anyway. It's county, it's other
State, federal.
yes.
I have no objection, but is there any, I mean, we have it looks like another citizen that would like to, can we squeeze, if this person wants to comment, allow that public comment? Okay, that's fine. Then I don't have any objection.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine.
And I will say, sir, if you had another comment, we could do exactly what Ron just suggested. There would be a second comment period. All right, well, first of all, I need to be patient with us. We need to have a motion to continue on our discussion. And I'd like to entertain a motion and then have a second to that.
I would so move.
And I'd like to stipulate that we go on for another, I'd say at least 30 minutes.
I would so move.
Okay, do we have a second? Sybil, you have an issue with another 30 minutes?
No,
Seconding?
sure. I second.
Any,
You
any,
guys aren't capable of doing that?
any discussion?
I would have thought that was
No.
done.
No, we needed to get a unanimous vote.
Yeah.
Um,
All in
Okay,
favor?
all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, all right.
Aye.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to put a pause at the end of section 11, and for the benefit of our guests here, so they don't have to sit through Articles 12 and possibly 13. Sir, if you had a comment, please, your name and address in 3 minutes.
My name is Barry Engel. I live on Live Oak Drive, and I've got a business in the town of Sunset Beach. Based upon what I understand being said here today, am I going to be able to put up my flag until this thing is finalized, or do I have to wait until somebody procrastinates? And I don't mean that in a mean way, but just, the time is of the essence. We're in the season.
You're in the season, yeah.
And if it takes 2 months for this to happen, we're out of the season. And it hurts us badly. So is there any way that I can get approval to put that up until all these other things are straightened out?
I can't deliberate, I can't answer you, but when you're finished with your comments, I'm going to ask staff a question, and I think
Okay,
the answer will come from that. to you.
Okay, I then thank you for your time and your consideration.
Thanks for your interest in our meeting here.
Yeah.
Chad, I have a question for staff. It would be my thinking that it would not be allowed until a text amendment has been approved by town council.
That's correct.
And the timing of that is going to take some time.
Correct.
It has to be advertised.
Correct.
It has to have a more public input.
Correct.
Town council then has to take it under advisement.
Correct. Yeah, for kind of where I'm at with that process, I'll be brief so we can get into Article 12, is that I am working on having meetings with the proper people that should be enforced, especially with the MB2 area, and having that meeting, having the right conversations with what they would like to see in the MB2 area, then incorporating this. As you know, once it gets to the planning board, it's a minimum from planning board to scheduling the public hearing to the actual public hearing. It's a minimum 3 months. So we're looking at that. You know, we'll have. I can't allow these types of signs until it's not. It's allowable to be able to be put up in. Ordinance says they're allowed. So I'll work on that as quickly as I can, but we'll just have to see.
So the answer is they're not allowed.
Correct.
And the answer also is that you're not going to turn a blind eye to it.
Correct.
Because
I
you
can't.
can't.
Yes. The only way, and I probably shouldn't volunteer this comment. I'll keep my comment to myself.
Sorry.
We like
I can
all
help it.
the only way options. What can we force you?
If notice of violation was sent and a property owner or violator appealed the notice, it would stay enforcement action times until that matter was heard.
Okay.
But
And that's not something that requires, the appeal can just be, here's a notice you're violating, and you send an email back saying, I'm
you have
appealing
to
it.
fill out the appeal and file the paperwork and pay the fee.
Okay.
So
So Chad, you're going to be discussing this, I guess, with
Who sets
some of
the
our
fine?
business.
What is the fine?
$50 a day.
And that's set where?
In our fine schedule.
It would be in
Violations.
Article 1 or 2.
Article 1.
Yeah, Article 1 lays out the fines for it. It's $50 a day.
Okay. That'll be up to town staff to communicate with our commercial property owners. All right, going on to Article 12, flood damage, environmental regulations. Wes, can you shortcut this and tell us that we really, particularly when it comes to Part 1, that we really don't have any authority here?
Yep, this is based on Code of Federal Regulations and the state's model code, and this was, I believe, recently adopted with the new maps. So, unless there's a reason to do so, I think it needs to just stay as is. And there's only very limited items in which you could actually change if you wanted to remain compliant. But sounds like everybody's good on that then.
Yes.
Move to part 2.
Okay, Part 2, stormwater management ordinances. I have, on me, it's on page 12-37, but I've got an outdated copy of the UDO, but that'll get you in the right ballpark. I've always had difficulty understanding the reason for us having a 200 square foot area.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd like Chad to maybe give me a reason as to why 200 square feet was.
I think that would have been something to put
This
in
is under
formal
development
planning
subject to
director
stormwater
review here.
requirements.
We argued over that number quite a bit.
Okay,
It
I
was,
hadn't.
it was basically like a 15 by 15 patio.
Okay.
225 square feet, I think is where, and I don't know how we argued back and forth. We were concerned with adding, that was for an add-on, right? Yeah, when you do a renovation project and added like a garage or a structure, that you had to go back and redo your plan. So there was quite extensive discussion to try to come up with that number, and I don't remember the variance from 200 to 300 to 400. So it was to require the plan, but not the big plan, because it's probably under the $30,000 limit.
Mhm.
If you're doing a small renovation to your property, adding non-pervious, like a patio or a garage or a storage thing or something.
But as soon as you do a 200-foot change, 200 square foot change, you put a roof over your patio that was gravel before, let's say, then it requires someone to do an 1.5-inch rain study on your entire property, not just on the 200 square foot that
I'm
you've added.
actually might need to mic Katie up, but I'm gonna ask her because she deals with a lot of CAMA land use stuff. Katie, remind me of that 200 square foot thing in a CAMA buffer.
No, that would be percentage in an AEC. You're only allowed to have a certain percentage
Okay.
of
Yeah.
and their square footage for. Well, you can speak to that.
You see, you have two buffers. In your 30-foot buffer, you are allowed a 200 square feet of decking, and then in your 75, you are allowed 30% impervious. Anything over that requires a stormwater engineered plan. The town itself only allows 45% total stormwater, and we require you capture all of that for the town.
So
But
Katie,
the 200 square foot deck is pervious per CAMA. It's the
Yes.
yeah.
yeah. So I have a feeling that's where that exemption, because I think anything under 200 or under, you get an exemption, CAMA exemption. Am I right?
Well,
I'm just saying that's probably where that number kind of started coming from.
if you're in an AEC, you got to pull a permit, basically, period, or and you got to go through the exemption process. I mean, this is going to apply mostly to areas outside the AEC. You don't have AEC.
So I retract everything I said. I have no idea where that number might have come from.
I would just say
the
that.
number-
Well, I buy Ron's
The number came up
explanation. It
on,
makes sense.
it basically applies to the then subparagraph A. So, okay, we know when someone's building a house on a lot in Sunset Beach, they have to do a stormwater plan, management plan now, and
Yes.
address the 1.5-inch array.
Correct.
Okay, we know it's done.
Yep.
Because it's over $30,000 project, they got to have a NCPE do it.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Then the question came up. Okay, now somebody wants to add an accessory structure. We had a long discussion. Patio.
Yep.
Okay. Do they have what happens then? So we said we got the two numbers, the 200 square feet, and we argued. We had numerous discussion over that number. If they exceed that, they have to come up with a new plan. And then we set the 30,000 limit. If it's under $30,000, they could have any, right?
Yep.
A professional engineer do it. And
Ron, a question for you. That's provided they haven't exceeded the 45%
yes, you can't
impervious
exceed
to
the 45.
begin with.
Correct.
But say you're going from 33 to 38 because
Yes.
you're adding 200 square feet. You have to look at your original plan.
But if 190 square feet, I don't have to do anything.
Yes.
Because I have to just prove that I haven't exceeded the 45%, but I do not have to do a rainfall retention study.
Correct.
Okay.
So
And there's a form online
yeah,
you go to and you pull down and you fill it out.
Okay.
That's now whether the 200 number is practical
I-
or
I-
right. I don't know how it's been working.
I'm going to withdraw my question about 200.
We did this. I don't know. Did we
Now
do-
I understand.
Was that the 1/6/20 revision? I don't remember where that rainfall 1.5-inch thing was added. I believe yes, it was the 1/6/20 revision of this where that was. I don't know what has happened. All I know is my neighborhood. What has happened? It has kind of worked. people are getting
Yeah, it works
stormwater plans
fine.
done, but I don't know how it's working throughout the community. If somebody comes here and wants to put up a garage and it's 400 square feet, do you guys make them do it again? I don't know how it's been working
Yeah,
in
it
real
works
life.
very well.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, capturing the first inch and a half.
Right.
It also solves the neighboring, gives the neighbors peace of mind to know there is something in place.
And a discharge isn't going to go onto their
Yeah,
property.
and once the people understand that if you get 4 inches in an hour, there's not a stormwater system in the world that's going to be able to control that. You're only looking to control the first inch and a half, so it works well.
All right.
So there's really no need. I mean, this is really just to
This is one of those things where I would
town
not
out
try
of
to
the hair of
I would
somebody
not try to
that's
reinvent the wheel on this one.
putting a bunch of pavers down and creating a walkway.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Does anybody else have any part 2, either section A or section B comments for Article 12? I do not. I had that one question and it's been thoroughly answered. I'd like to move on to Article 13, subdivision regulations, and see what kind of progress we can make. In 1301, we talk about 1301A. We talk about the technical review procedure and a report of findings should be prepared. I've not seen a TRC report of findings. The only thing I see is in the permitting process for whatever size property, that there's a series of questions and then red marks where you say yes, satisfied, or no. You go back to the applicant and you ask for more information.
Correct.
And sometimes there'll generally be something in there from the TRC
Yes.
meeting, but
Yes.
I've not seen a report. Is there really no such report?
There's no such report. I mean, it's incorporated into the way I do it. It's incorporated into this this preliminary plat procedure right here. You'll see the red line strucken through, complete. My comments, red line strucken through, and then complete up underneath it, so you can see the dialogue of
Yes, and
all
that's
that.
helpful.
And you also see down at the bottom additional comments where I put in there. Most of the time it says, please satisfy all TRC comments, and once it's red line, I'll put complete up underneath it.
Do you provide like the emails?
I try to sometimes, yeah. So if I need to start giving you all the TRC comments and the emails into that, I think I've done it for 1 or 2. I haven't done it for all.
That would probably satisfy it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, what would satisfy me is inclusion of a non-quorum portion of the planning board. It to be, even if we're in the peanut gallery behind non-speaking, to listen and become pre-aware of items that are coming before, that are eventually going to come before the planning board.
So in
And we've already talked about that before.
You'll get in and you'll get in your draft material today. There's a section on technical review committee and procedure, and so it is a draft.
Yeah, I know it was in a prior article.
But it does now include, at the discretion of the UDO administrator, which we can change, planning board liaison as an optional member.
Thank you. Thank you.
On 1301, I wrote a comment. You're talking about lengthening the
Yes.
validity time to 2 years.
Yes.
I guess it seems long to me.
Hey, nowadays, that would
We're at 1 year now, right?
Yeah, that's just almost impossible because say you get your preliminary plat approval and you haven't gotten your state stormwater yet, it's sometimes taking 6 months to even get your state stormwater.
It's longer than that right now.
Yeah, it's longer than that, and then the time that it takes to get your infrastructure in, get your roads in, it's 2 years. And state statute also says that basically if it's a multi-phase development, which is anything over, I believe, 25 acres, you're vested for 7 now. I think that, it would behoove the town to just say, hey, you're good for 2 years. You need to come back. That's fine, but
Can a developer engage that multi-phase concept by just making that statement?
Well-
let's take the sanctuary. The sanctuary is obviously a multi-phase.
They're entitled that per state law.
Okay.
It
I
doesn't
mean, I'm
have-
saying that that's good, but
Yeah.
it's more reasonable.
Yes, and that link we'll incorporate that link. We'll add a definition now for multi-phase development in your ordinance, unless it's already in there. I can't recall.
The one thing that I think we have an obligation as a planning board or as a town is to protect our citizens, or at least the interests of our citizens in the validity of our UDO. We have vested right, or developers, we as citizens have vested rights that are created or triggered with certain durations. And we telegraph everything we're doing here at the planning board, obviously. And the situation could easily happen where somebody then just walks into Chad the night before it goes to council and throws everything down on his desk. And now they've got vested rights under the original ordinance. I don't know that we can deal with that. I don't know that we can prevent that. But it is certainly and then for that project, if you will, to just sit there and sit there and sit there and sit there. And we've got situations, examples of that now, where it almost appears like the developer is not really serious about moving forward anytime soon.
They just want to protect their entitlements.
Right.
Is there a way that we can limit the vested rights based upon progress?
You've got to go by statute at a minimum. State statute, again, that multi-phase is 25 acres or more, and then there's distinction between statutory vested rights and then common law vested rights. So if I go out there and I start and I put in a good amount of my infrastructure and my preliminary plat expires, there's a pretty good case that I'm vested in perpetuity from a common law standpoint.
Okay.
And so I have expended infrastructure in good faith. I've expended capital in good faith towards my entitlements. And so I don't think that anyone would disagree, with ripping out somebody's, rights to that project, right? After they've done that. So it's a tricky thing.
What about if there is no investment, good faith investment?
If there is no good faith in investment, then absolutely that statutory vesting can expire.
My concern in all of this is that mortgage applications have dropped by 50% in the last month. We have a lot of developers that are.
That's nationwide, and
Oh, yeah, I
southeastern
know.
North Carolina is a much different picture. It's about half of that.
Yeah,
But we don't need
we're
to
better off.
necessarily go there. But
Right.
I mean, I would advise the town to defer to state statutes for vesting and
Okay.
Yeah, well, my question on the time frame going from 12 to 24 months, my initial thought was it's too long, because you could have the situation that Pete is that you threw the thing down just to vest the rights, and now you don't got to do anything for 2 years. Seemed a bit long. Now, to the real developer who's doing something, you're telling me that the 24 months is reasonable.
it's tight. It's even
So,
tight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You sold me on that. I
Yeah.
think what
Yeah.
originally hit my mind was what Pete was going to is
Mhm.
they throw it down just to get under the wire of an ordinance change would not doing any activity, but we're sort of stuck with that.
I think you guys just think about long term what you want for the town, and if someone gets their vested rights, so be it. But if they expire, great. You guys think about what it is long term you want for the town, and we'll incorporate that.
Do you have a recommendation on that? I mean, we're
24.
Yeah,
Yeah,
to
20
mirror the
days is
state
24,
statute.
Yeah.
okay.
Okay. Moving along in section 13.
Well,
Anybody have any
I guess before
items?
we run out of time, I have one of my favorite items. Is the last dot on 1301, confirm continued allowance of the installation of private streets. I hate private roads. I'm stuck with one, so I guess I have bias. I think we should get rid of them. Because it's just a nightmare to the eventual homeowner who didn't know what they were getting into. In my mind, the builder, the developer should be required to build the road to whatever applicable standard, state or local. And then at the end of the development, when they're disappearing, the declaring or whatever they're going to be called, the road should be brought back to that standard and turned over to the town.
So I'll answer your question or your statement in two parts. One, I don't think we can because the town,
Not in the ETJ,
not in the ETJ.
but within the corporate limits, you
Right.
can require all streets be public.
But they are built to
Right,
standards.
But
The maintenance is the
yeah,
problem.
that's what happens afterwards. And to
Right.
my mind, and the other problem is, and CCHL will have one too, no matter if you're on a municipal road or a private road, you're taxed at exactly the same rate.
Yep.
Okay? And to me, that's not fair. That road should be turned over to the town, the state, or whoever, make it a public road, and the public maintains it from your tax dollars, and that's it. And not only that, the oddball thing of it, the Powell funds
Yep.
only apply to municipal roads.
Yes.
So, and doesn't apply to non-municipal roads, which is just to me an odd quirk in the way the law was written. If it becomes a municipal road, they can access state money.
Well,
and
it's
fix
a
it.
town program, so that's.
Right. So, but a road that has never come into the town can't even access the state money. So I know we got 5 minutes left. So my answer to your third dot is, or whatever that last dot is no. Get rid of private roads and
Okay.
inside Sunset Beach. But I'm sure I'll be outvoted, but that's okay.
What, Chad, do you see any issues with staff on that? It changes how developers, particularly in subdivisions, how they operate.
I don't have a problem either way. I think Ron is smart enough to realize that he lives in an HOA like I do. That knowing that once the houses are built, it becomes at that point a problematic for citizen to maintain what they drive on every day. And on private streets, it becomes up to the HOA. But they are built initially to a standard, and Sunset Beach exceeds NCDOT standards, where then at that point you would need the developer, and Wes, correct me if I'm wrong on the process, the developer would then have to petition for the town to take them over.
Well, yes. So we would have particular rules about when the streets were taken over,
Yep.
which is another discussion. But this would be a policy decision for you all. You can limit it to, for example, say you want to allow private streets on, to serve no more than X number of lots, for example. You can do. I've seen places that do that, or you can keep it as is. And
We wouldn't get into a situation like, I'll use Riverside Drive as an example. That would never come into play in the discussion we're having right now.
well, that was already platted many years.
That's what I
ago.
mean.
Yeah,
It's-
So this would
A
be
judge decided that.
well, if Riverside Drive was one tract, and the town said, and the town rule was, let's just say that it was never, it's been platted since the 70s. Say it wasn't platted, and it was just one tract, and the town rule was that all streets have to be public. When that was platted, they'd have to comply with making that street a public street, and they'd have to be built to whatever standard it would be. And see, that's where an instance where some of our beach communities, they do not allow any private streets because their position is that you should afford access to public trust, etc.
Yes. And Palm Cove is the same thing. That would really be a bag of worms.
Yeah, well, but we're not going back on that.
Yeah,
But-
it would be moving this forward.
Yes.
So going forward, the way I propose
Well,
it,
let's,
if you build a development or do a development,
the
I
town
can be
needs,
sold on size a little bit, maybe major developments only,
yeah,
that the roads designed to the good standard, at the end of it gets turned over. I mean, it's, once the development's done, and anyone can drive on your road, it's public. To me, the idea of a
well, it's
private,
not restricted access.
right, there's no restricted access. To my mind, it is a public road. It's just, now we're really talking to scratch, right?
Mhm.
The town don't want it because they don't want to fix them, okay? obviously. Well,
Well,
I mean, it's
usually
more
they've
work,
gotten to the point of disrepair that the cost is
It's high.
excessive to
but
get it up to standards
right.
again.
But if it was built, clearly they're going to be built to standard. I agree with you. That's true. It's just
Keeping up with it.
keeping up with it. To me,
Yeah.
it's a public road. It's public access. Anyone can drive on it. It's just, and you ain't taxed lower because you're stuck maintaining your own road.
So
I'll shut up. It's 11.
No, it's fine.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
I mean, we just went through this at Sea Trails. How onerous was that transfer? Chad?
Say that again.
We just went through this at Sea Trail.
Hmm.
It was clear though. They just got it up to standards and we took them over.
Yeah. So, I mean, was that an
Straightforward.
onerous process or
No.
was it fairly
Yeah,
straightforward?
Dustin just had to go around and
Yeah.
inspect them.
Yeah.
Roads, all of the roads in Sea Trail are up to standard?
They were
Some are.
adopted at standard, yes, and not all roads in Sea Trail are town roads. There are some that are still not
Well,
town roads.
And again, I'm only talking about going forward.
Yeah.
Correct.
A whole separate issue is how to go back.
Right.
I'm not talking
No,
about
you can't
that
go
now.
back.
You want to go
Just
forward?
moving
I'm
Yeah.
talking about anybody that submits for new development.
So I
that
know we're
they
getting
will
to
not
the,
have the word private road on their plans anymore.
Can
It's
you
future
can you
public road?
entertain that as you go through your process?
Yes. It is the board in general agreement that they want to limit the future amount of private streets.
I'm with Ron on this.
Okay.
I think I am too,
Okay.
because I think the
ETJ,
builders
we can't do
learned-
anything, but
I think the builders learned early on they could do pretty much what they want to. Our roads that way. We have to repair our road. And they learned, well, okay, when you're half built out, you take over the roads. It's all you make an HOA. I mean, that was in the contract
yep.
that and therefore they had no responsibility. Even though they said when they turned it over, they would leave the roads in good shape.
Yep. So sounds good. We'll
Good.
put something in
And
place.
to me, it should be written such that not only got to build them to the standards, when they come to the turnover part,
Yep.
when they develop it, they have to be
to standard.
like new. I mean, you can't like run your
Yes. And
all your
we'll-
construction vehicles.
And the
over
way
for-
that
Well,
and the
well-
way that process works,
well, we're
Dustin
gonna
looks
have to
at core
debate that.
samples. Yeah.
well, I don't know
too.
how, but there seems to be. I mean,
well, it's difficult. So some places they want it as soon as the final plat is approved, they want to take it because they know that the roads are good at that point in time, so that it's not turned to the HOA. Other times they take it after a certain number of homes are
Right.
built. That's just a discussion that we're going to have. That's another
All right,
one where
work-
there's no
work up
silver
something
bullet.
on that.
Yeah.
So Pete, before he gets into the handout material, we're stopping in the middle of 13.1. We have
We-
not surpassed 13.1, correct?
Correct.
Well, I was finished with 13.1, but
Yeah.
maybe the rest of the board wasn't. Were you guys finished with 13.01? I was.
Well, are we finished with the roads? I mean,
Yes.
Ron, you're okay with that?
And so the next meeting, which will be on the 21st of July, we'll
Yes.
pick up on 13.02, final
Okay.
plat.
And
And I think we accomplished quite a bit today in making it through 10,
Yes.
11, 12, and starting off on 13.
And-
So the 7th meeting will be on the 21st of July here in council chambers at 9 a.m.
Mr. Chair, if I may,
Yes.
before you adjourn. So you have, for review, well, obviously we'll start with the audit. And so I don't even know if we're going to get to this material at the next meeting. But this is your first trove of items, is Article 1, all of Article 1, which is there's not much to it. And then a first part of Article 2, which is administration and procedures, includes discussion on all the relevant boards and staff members.
Which you just addressed before, yeah.
And then we've got common review procedures are in here. And then we have our also the minor site plan and major site plan approval process. Now that's been, we have drafted that such that certain multifamily 5 or less is a staff approval. And then major site plans is 5 to 10 units. And then anything over 10 units will ultimately be a special use permit. That's just how we've drafted it now. Doesn't mean that that's final. Just like everything else in here, nothing is final. And I think you guys are aware of that. So if you're reading something and it's, well, this is way wrong or whatever
this
it
come
is,
from?
we'll
Okay.
get it squared.
You just explained what at least your format is so that we understand it as we read through it.
Yes.
Originally on, you had given us a structure, existing versus recommended.
Yes.
That is still correct, or through all of this other stuff is your recommended? Because like you're saying, we got Article 1 now.
Is this the new structure?
So
This
you
will be-
haven't, you're still,
I'm
this is
still
correct. You haven't
generally going to go by that framework, particularly in terms of the articles. Yes, sir.
okay.
So Article 2 will be a large article because you've got certain permits and requirements for plans all over the place in your current UDO. We're trying to pull them all into one article so somebody knows if they got to get a zoning permit or whatever, a major site plan, it's all there. And that will be, Article 2 will be given it to you at 2 or 3 sections. This is the first section.
Does everybody appreciate what Ron just brought out and Wes just described, that the format of our UDO is going to change?
Right.
Where the articles are, what's included in the various articles, and the article numbers, they are going to change.
Is there a way to get a document that is kind of a chart? Says, okay, this new piece of Article 2 is being grabbed from Article 6, 2.c. So we kind of go back and look at the original structure and say, okay, blot that out. It goes here.
I'll email that to you. I have it. I thought I'd already given it to you, but I'll make sure you have one by the end
Okay,
of the
great.
day.
Well, and Pete's got, Ron pointed to that, but I'll just add, you'll see in the language anything that's not underlined is old material that's from your existing UDO. Anything that's underlined is new, and anything that's stricken through is a section that's been pulled over and is stricken through.
So when you say new could be an existing, unchanged, that you've just pulled to a new section.
No.
When I say new, it is completely new.
New language.
New language.
It's new language.
Okay.
Yes, new language. Yeah.
I think what he was kind of at, maybe I got you wrong. There's no way for it to tell if you moved something from that wasn't in Article 1, say it came from Article 10 or something. We can't see that on this. We don't know that you've pulled something.
We can go that route if we need to go that route. If it gets to that, I think that why don't
Because a number of our items said this is inappropriate here, it should be here.
that's right, and
So
and that's referenced in
So we should be able
in
to find it from the tape, the
code
table.
audit, and I think you all spend some time with this section, and we'll just, if we need to modify how we're handling this, we'll,
All right,
we'll
let us
do that.
let us go through here, and
Yeah.
I'm sure we're going to have more questions about
Yeah.
formatting.
Yeah.
and to better
No.
understand it.
Please know we've got to get through the audit of the articles before we can get into what Wes just
Right,
gave
we're
you.
not going to even talk about this until we're through with
Yep.
Appendix C, heritage trees. List.
Right.
Okay. All right.
I make a motion to adjourn.
We had public comments before.
Sorry.
Want to give the opportunity. And seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn.
I make such a motion.
Okay, do we have a second?
Second.
All right,
Thank you, Sylvia.
meeting adjourned
I
till
don't know what comes after.
July
21st.
21st. There you go.
But we have a regular meeting on the
Be
second.
my
so
birthday.
Yes.
Lovely birthday present.
The 7th, right?
I forget.